Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was slowly fading away? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Katsuki Bakugo didn't usually run from anything. That was a fact as solid as the tiled hospital floor currently squeaking under his hurried footsteps. But this was different. This involved needles, and he had made it very clear to everyone on this floor that needles were absolutely not on today's agenda. He pushed himself harder, breath short and irritated as he flew past a row of open room curtains. Behind him, the sound of rubber soles slapped against the floor in desperate pursuit. Bakugo! Problem child, stop right this instant. The strained voice echoed from behind him, filled with both authority and exhaustion. Katsuki didn't waste time looking back. He already knew who it was. Tall, tired-looking, annoyingly persistent Nurse Aizawa. The guy meant well, but he also carried syringes like they were candy to hand out to unsuspecting kids. "No way I'm letting you stab me today," Katsuki shouted over his shoulder, his voice bouncing off the walls as he caught a glimpse of an open door. He turned sharply toward it and slipped inside, shutting the door behind him as quietly as his shaking hands allowed. Inside, the room was much dimmer. The blinds were partially drawn, allowing thin lines of soft light to stretch across the floor like pale ribbons. Machines hummed gently, creating a rhythmic background that contrasted with Katsuki's fast breathing. The scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixing with the faint smell of linen. He leaned against the door, letting himself catch his breath for a moment. When he finally looked up, he noticed a bed positioned in the corner of the room. The sheets were neatly pulled up, forming a small hill where a boy lay sleeping. His hair was a soft shade of green, messy and fluffy as though he'd been resting for longer than a simple nap. His breaths were slow, almost too slow, like the air was taking its time to leave and return to his lungs. Katsuki frowned as he stepped closer, squinting at the boy's still face. "Hey," he whispered, lowering his voice to a rougher, quieter tone. "Don't make this weird. I'm just hiding here. You didn't see anything." The boy didn't respond. Not even a twitch. Katsuki leaned over slightly, waving a hand once in front of the boy's closed eyes. "You hear me? I said keep quiet. That means don't tell anyone I was here." Still nothing. Not a flinch. Not a stir. Katsuki scowled, placing his hands on his hips. "Wow. What are you, some kind of heavy sleeper? Wake up, Shrek Jr." There was not even the slightest reaction to the insult. Katsuki's irritation slowly shifted into a subtle, uncomfortable curiosity. He bent forward a little more as if confirming the boy was actually breathing. When he noticed the gentle rise and fall of his chest, he scoffed to himself. "You're lucky you're alive. Thought this room might have been empty," he murmured as he started to step back. The sudden crash of the door swinging open made him jump. Nurse Aizawa stumbled into the room, panting heavily, his glasses fogged slightly from all the chasing. "There you are," Aizawa said as he pointed an accusing finger at Katsuki before pressing his free hand to his chest. "You gave me quite the workout. You know boys shouldn't run off from their injection appointments." Katsuki crossed his arms, shifting his weight stubbornly. "Boys maybe shouldn't, but I do. I'm not getting jabbed today. Not by you. Not by anyone." Aizawa stepped further inside, his face softening into a pleading expression. "Katsuki, we've talked about this. This one is important. It will help you feel better, truly." "I already feel fine," Katsuki snapped back as he quickly moved behind the foot of the bed, like he was using the unconscious boy as a shield. "You said that last time," Aizawa reminded him as he slowly approached, keeping his tone gentle. "But your symptoms say otherwise. Please, just come with me. It will only take a moment." Katsuki shook his head firmly, gripping the metal bar at the edge of the bed. "No. I don't want it. And I'm not going back out there." Aizawa sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead with two long fingers. "You are making things far more difficult for both of us, young man." Before Katsuki could fire back with another insult, a soft, trembling voice drifted from behind him. "Mommy." The single fragile word sliced through the tension in the room. Katsuki's eyes widened as he turned quickly. The green-haired boy on the bed had shifted slightly, his eyelids fluttering open. The faint motion was barely noticeable, but to Katsuki, it might as well have been a lightning strike. Katsuki stepped closer, feeling a wave of relief he wasn't sure he should be feeling. "Oh, you're alive after all. Took you long enough to wake up," he said, lowering his voice as he leaned over him. But Aizawa reacted very differently. The nurse rushed past Katsuki with startling urgency, nearly dropping his clipboard as he leaned over the boy. His breath hitched in a way that sent a strange ripple through the room. "Oh my Midoriya! You're awake!" Aizawa exclaimed, his hands hovering anxiously above the boy as if afraid to touch him too roughly. "Stay still, young man. I need to alert the doctors." He didn't wait for a response. The nurse dashed out the door, shouting down the hallway for assistance, his voice growing fainter with every hurried step. Katsuki watched him leave with a baffled expression. "What the hell? Why did he act like that?" he muttered, brows furrowing. His attention shifted back to the boy whose half-open eyes now stared up at him. The boy's pupils were foggy with confusion, his mouth slightly parted as though he was still caught between sleep and reality. "Who are you?" Izuku whispered, his voice frail and unsteady. Katsuki blinked, then straightened his posture. He stuffed his hands into his pockets, letting out a scoff as he tried to mask the strange flutter in his chest. "Me," Katsuki replied as he leaned slightly closer with a crooked smirk. "I'm your worst nightmare." Izuku blinked again, looking more confused than threatened, his gaze trying to focus on Katsuki's face. Katsuki clicked his tongue and looked away, muttering under his breath, "Figures you don't get it." Katsuki sat on the edge of the hospital bed with his arms crossed so tightly that his elbows nearly touched. His lip jutted out in a stubborn scowl as he stared at the tray on the table. On it sat the very object of his dread, a capped syringe gleaming under the bright light, waiting for him like it had all the time in the world. He kicked his feet slightly against the lower bar of the bed in frustration. "Do I really have to take it?" he asked, dragging out the question with a whine that surprised even himself. He tilted his head toward Aizawa, who was organizing paperwork near the counter. Aizawa adjusted his glasses and turned toward him with a calm smile. "Yes, you do," he replied while tapping his pen against the clipboard. "But if you agree to take the injection properly this time, I won't tell your mother that you ran off again and tried to escape from the nurses." Katsuki's mouth fell open slightly. He stared at Aizawa with widening eyes, as though he had just been handed a life-or-death ultimatum. "What kind of choice is that?" he muttered as he curled his fingers against the bedsheet. "An injection or getting my head smacked by my mom?" He stared at the syringe for a moment, his expression twisting. His voice shrank into a mumble. "Both sound terrible." Aizawa chuckled quietly while flipping another form. "It's good motivation, isn't it? You always listen to your mother more than me, anyway." Katsuki clicked his tongue and looked away, pretending he wasn't thinking about the real threat hiding behind the injection. The pain, the sting, the lingering soreness that felt far too familiar. His fingers fumbled with the hem of his shirt, pressing and twisting it nervously. Before Aizawa could come closer with the syringe, Katsuki suddenly asked, "Hey, what about that green-haired kid earlier?" He said it casually, but his eyes flicked toward the door with more interest than he meant to show. Aizawa paused mid-step, surprised by the question. After a beat of silence, he let out a soft laugh. "What's this? Do you have a crush on him?" He leaned slightly forward with a teasing grin. "You're still too young for that sort of thing." Katsuki gagged loudly and nearly fell backwards from the bed. "What? Absolutely not." He waved his hands in disgust, his entire face twisting as if he had swallowed something rotten. "Are you crazy? A crush? On that broccoli-haired kid? Gross." "If that's the case," Aizawa replied, still chuckling, "then why ask about him?" "Because I thought you might know something," Katsuki snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at him. "But you're too ugly and you look like a stick, so never mind." Aizawa's smile froze. He looked down at his lanky arms and sighed with a defeated slouch on his shoulders. You really are honest to a fault, young man. I'm too old to argue with a kid calling me a stick. Katsuki didn't stick around to hear anything else. He hopped off the bed and bolted into the hallway with full speed, his slippers slapping loudly against the floor. For a moment he ran with a smile spreading across his face. But deep underneath that smile lay a knot of fear twisting tightly in his chest. A fear of the needle, a fear of hospitals, and more than that, a fear of the constant pain he had grown used to living with every single day. He slowed down as he approached a familiar room. He recognized the soft green blanket from earlier and realized the door was slightly ajar. But this time, a loud commotion spilled out into the hallway. Voices layered over one another, quick and anxious, accompanied by machines beeping at uneven rhythms. What's going on in there? Katsuki asked under his breath as he leaned forward to peek in. Before he could get close enough, Aizawa suddenly appeared behind him, making Katsuki flinch hard enough that he stumbled a step away from the door. Hey! Don't sneak up on me like that, old stick! Katsuki snapped while rubbing the back of his neck. His heart beat faster from the scare rather than the sprint. Aizawa lifted both hands as though preparing to apologize, but then his gaze slid toward the open door. Recognition flickered across his face, and slowly, the corners of his mouth lifted into a knowing smirk. Katsuki immediately backed up, cheeks coloring faintly with embarrassment. Wipe that look off your face, he warned with a glare. If you start teasing me again, I'll tell my dad you're picking a fight with me, and he'll fire you on the spot. I'm only joking, Aizawa replied gently while waving his hand. I know your father wouldn't fire me over something that trivial. Now then, what are you doing in Izuku's room? Izuku? Katsuki echoed while scrunching his nose, mimicking the name with a slight twist in his voice. So that's his name? And why is it so loud inside? What, is it his birthday or something? Aizawa exhaled lightly through his nose and shook his head. No, nothing like that. He's only 9 years old. You wouldn't be able to understand completely. That's why I'm asking, Katsuki shot back, lifting his hands in frustration. So I can understand. How else am I supposed to know what all the yelling is for? Aizawa closed his eyes for a moment before speaking softly. Midoriya frequently collapses due to a heart condition. Whenever he faints, he sleeps for a very long time. Far longer than any normal child should. His voice slowed down as if choosing each word with care. Last year he fainted again. And he never woke up. Not until last night. The doctors truly believed he wouldn't open his eyes again. Katsuki stared at him, the words sinking into him like cold water. He slept for a whole year? He asked, disbelief tightening his voice. Is that even possible? It is unusual, Aizawa admitted, but Midoriya is a strange case. Much like you in his own way. Katsuki frowned deeply, unsure whether to be offended or curious. The idea that the boy had slept through seasons and holidays and birthdays made his chest feel strangely tight. Is he going to get discharged today? Katsuki asked suddenly. His voice came out quieter than he intended, and a small twinge of something sharp and uncomfortable tugged at his chest. Aizawa looked down at Katsuki's small, tense hands. A hint of pity softened his tired eyes. He reached out and gently took one of Katsuki's hands, giving it a warm but firm squeeze. It's still too early for that. Now come along. You've been running around too much, and you need to be back in your room. Katsuki didn't respond immediately. He turned his gaze toward Izuku's room one more time, staring through the gap in the door as doctors moved hurriedly inside. The beeping of machines echoed in the hall, mixing with low murmurs of medical jargon he couldn't understand. Something about that boy, about Izuku, pulled at him with a feeling he couldn't name. After a long moment, Katsuki finally turned away and walked slowly down the hall beside Aizawa, but he glanced back over his shoulder. He caught one last glimpse of a shaking green blanket before the door closed fully. Even after he walked away, his mind refused to let go of that image. 7 years later, the sound of footsteps slapping against the hospital floor echoed through the hallway, strong enough to rattle the pens sitting on unattended desks. Right behind them came a frustrated shout that nearly every long-term patient recognized instantly. Aizawa's tired voice traveled through the corridor in a familiar trail of desperation, calling out Katsuki's name with a mixture of irritation and exhaustion. Katsuki heard him, of course he did, but instead of speeding up or pretending not to notice, he actually slowed down and turned his head slightly, catching sight of the lanky nurse limping after him with a clipboard tucked under one arm. Katsuki raised his hand mockingly and shouted back, "Try to catch me, old man. You can do it. Don't give up now." The teasing tone in his voice only made Aizawa's face tighten with irritation, and it was clear the nurse was beginning to reach the end of his stamina. Aizawa shouted something unintelligible in his frustration before gathering enough breath to yell, "How dare you!" His voice cracked halfway through, which only made Katsuki laugh harder as he jogged backward for a few steps, clearly enjoying every moment of the chaos he was creating. "Don't be petty. It's just like an ant bite," Katsuki said with exaggerated nonchalance while rolling his eyes. Aizawa came to a stop in the middle of the hallway and bent forward with his hands on his knees, panting heavily as he tried to catch his breath. "Are you crazy? This is not an injection," he managed to say before collapsing onto the floor, where several sympathetic patients rushed over and began trying to fan him with whatever was within reach. Katsuki didn't look back anymore. He had done this routine so many times over the years that it barely fazed him. He pushed open the door to his room and stepped inside with sweat still clinging to his temples, feeling the familiar comfort of the space that had practically become his second home. His room had barely changed over the years, and he knew every corner of it as well as his own bedroom at home. He was about to shut the door behind him when he noticed something unusual. The room next door, which had been empty for as long as he could remember, had its door half open with the lights on fully inside. That room had remained vacant through the years because every long-term patient knew better than to request the space beside the loud, argumentative blonde boy. Yet now, for the first time in 7 years, someone had taken it. Katsuki felt a strange sense of familiarity wash over him, an odd feeling that made his heartbeat quicken without explanation. Curiosity pulled him forward until he stood at the doorway, peering inside cautiously. A boy rested on the bed, tucked under a blanket that reached up to his chest. His hair was messy and faintly curled at the ends, glowing softly under the warm overhead light. His breathing was slow but steady, and the peacefulness of his expression struck Katsuki deeply, almost as if he had seen that face somewhere long ago. He stepped closer without quite understanding why, and a faint, unexplainable tension settled in his chest. It only grew stronger when the boy's eyelids began to flutter as if awakening from a deep sleep. The gentle movement continued until the boy finally opened his eyes, revealing a pair of bright green irises that focused directly on Katsuki as though recognizing him on instinct. The reaction was immediate. The boy sat up in alarm, and Katsuki jerked back with equal shock, both of them stumbling over their own panic. Their voices shot out at the exact same time, neither one willing to give the other a chance to speak first, and the room that had been so quiet a few seconds ago turned into a burst of startled noise. "Izuku!" Izuku sat upright on his newly assigned hospital bed, his small hands gripping the blanket so tightly that the fabric bunched around his fingers. His mother stood beside him, smoothing down the edges of the sheets as if the neatness of the bed could somehow make this situation easier. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixing with the soft scent of his mother's perfume, a smell he had always found calming. Still, the tension in his chest refused to settle. "Mom, am I really going to live in the hospital from now on?" he asked. His voice trembled slightly, but he fought to keep his emotions under control. He blinked rapidly, trying to stop the tears from forming as he looked up at her with wide, pleading eyes. His mother stopped smoothing the blanket and looked at him with a worried expression. "Izuku, sweetheart, it's safer for you here," she said. Her voice carried a thin layer of fear beneath the softness, as though she were trying to mask how much this decision hurt her. "The doctors will keep an eye on you, and they'll be able to help whenever something happens." Izuku lowered his gaze to his hands, feeling frustration simmer beneath his skin. His condition had never made sense to him. His fainting spells came unpredictably, sometimes every hour, sometimes only once a day. Sometimes he would fall asleep and not wake up until days or even months later. He didn't know what was worse, the episodes themselves, or the helplessness that followed. He wanted to be strong, to be normal, to be awake long enough to enjoy life like any other kid. But every time he tried, his body failed him without warning. "I know I'm not normal," he said quietly. His fingers tugged at the blanket as he spoke. "And I know there's something wrong with me that nobody understands, but it doesn't feel good to be stuck here forever. I want to go outside and go to school like everyone else. I want to make friends too." He kept his eyes down, unable to bring himself to look at his mother. He didn't want her to see the disappointment or the sadness he couldn't hide. He knew she was only doing what she thought was best, but it didn't make the situation any easier. His mother knelt in front of him, placing a gentle hand on his cheek as she tried to smile. "Izuku, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thin and shaky. "I love you so much, sweetheart. I'll visit every week, I promise." Her eyes glistened as she reached out to brush his hair away from his forehead. "I'll be really busy from now on with work, so please take care of yourself. I know you hate being here, but you need it." Izuku lifted his face slightly, noticing the way her lips trembled as she spoke, like she was holding herself back from crying. The sight made his chest ache. He didn't want to see her break down. He didn't want to be the reason she cried again. He understood too well what she was trying to do. She was distancing herself, slowly and painfully, because she didn't know how much time they had left together. The thought made him swallow hard. He closed his eyes and leaned forward, wrapping his arms around her shoulders in a tight hug. She embraced him just as firmly, pressing a kiss to his cheek before pulling back abruptly, as though leaving quickly made it easier for both of them. She murmured a soft goodbye and hurried out of the room before her tears could fall in front of him. After she left, Izuku remained seated for a moment, staring at the door she had walked through. He wasn't angry at her. He wasn't angry at anyone. He was simply sad for himself, sad for the time he might not have, sad for how lonely everything suddenly felt. When he finally lay down on the bed, he reached for the small phone beside him and placed an earbud in one ear. Soft music filled his mind, creating a small bubble of comfort that eased the tension in his chest. He closed his eyes as he listened, letting the melody lull him deeper into relaxation. Eventually, his breathing evened out. His body felt heavy. He was used to drifting off like this, unsure whether he would wake up in an hour or next month, but he found some small relief in the fact that his mother had gotten him a softer bed this time. If he had to sleep for days on end, at least it wouldn't hurt his back. Just as he felt himself slipping away from reality, he sensed something strange, warm air brushing his face, almost like someone was leaning very close to him. His eyebrows twitched slightly, and a faint frown formed on his lips. He thought for a moment that maybe his mother had forgotten something and returned to check on him, though he couldn't understand why she would be standing so near his face. He slowly opened his eyes, still half dazed from the pull of sleep. The first thing he saw was a pair of red eyes staring directly at him from an uncomfortably close distance. His heart jolted violently, and the sudden shock tore through whatever sleepiness he felt. The face looming above him belonged to a blond boy with wild hair and an expression caught between curiosity and annoyance. Izuku's scream shot into the air instantly, loud and shrill enough to rattle the bed frame. Who are you? Why are you in my room?" he shouted as he scrambled back, his body pressing into the headboard. He reached blindly for the nearest object he could find, which happened to be one of his hospital slippers. He grabbed it and aimed it at the boy, shaking with fear and indignation. The blonde's eyes widened, and without waiting for Izuku to throw anything, he scrambled away from the bed and dashed out of the room in a full sprint. Izuku hurled the slipper anyway, but it hit the doorframe instead of the escaping intruder. "Weirdo," he muttered under his breath as he hurriedly got up and rushed to the door. He shut it firmly and turned the lock with trembling fingers, double-checking that it was truly sealed before stepping away from it. Only then did he breathe out shakily and press a hand to his racing heart. It figured that on his first day here, he'd already encountered someone strange enough to sneak into his room and stare at him while he slept. Up until now, Izuku had thought his biggest worry would be his condition. Izuku leaned his back against the door after locking it, still breathing a bit fast from the shock. The slipper he had used as a weapon lay abandoned by the foot of his bed, and he stared at it for a moment before shaking his head slowly. Judging from the orange jacket the boy had been wearing, bright, oversized, and definitely not part of hospital staff uniforms, Izuku could only assume that he was a patient here too. The boy didn't look sick, at least not at first glance, but the red eyes and erratic energy told Izuku that something about him was unusual. Maybe unusual enough to belong here. He sighed quietly and rubbed his forehead. That orange jacket really was striking, and although he refused to admit it out loud, it did make the blonde look a little cute. Just a little. Izuku frowned immediately at the thought, annoyed that even in a place as hopeless as a hospital, he had to deal with weirdos sneaking into his room. If that boy tried entering again, Izuku promised himself he would willingly throw the slipper at his face next time rather than miss. As the silence settled back over the room, Izuku noticed for the first time how dull the place looked. The walls were bare except for a calendar, the shelves were empty, and the entire room felt almost as lifeless as his own situation. He figured that if he was going to live here, even temporarily, he should at least do something to make the space feel more like home. He opened his duffel bag and began taking out his My Hero University merchandise. Posters he had collected for years, small banners he used to hang on his bedroom walls, and figurines he had kept safe inside their boxes. Placing the first poster on the wall gave him a small spark of happiness, enough to make him continue decorating with a little more excitement. Soon, the shelves were lined with figurines, and the walls proudly held his favorite heroes in colorful displays. While he was reaching into his bag for another item, he heard a knock on the door. He startled a little, immediately grabbing the slippers again as a precaution. His heart fluttered with dread at the possibility that the blonde boy might have returned. A gentle voice called from the hallway telling him to open the door, and Izuku cracked it open just enough to see who it was. Relief washed through him when he saw an older nurse standing there instead of the intruder from earlier. "Hello," the nurse said with a polite nod. He had tired eyes but a kind expression. "I'll have to remind you that locking your room is against hospital regulations." Izuku flushed in embarrassment, gripping the door weakly. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to break any rules. It's just, this weird guy came into my room earlier without permission, and I got scared." The nurse scratched his head with a resigned sigh, his expression suggesting that this wasn't the first time he had heard something like that. "Let me guess," he began, tilting his head slightly. "Tall kid, blonde hair, red eyes, unpredictable expressions?" Izuku stared at him with widened eyes at how accurately the nurse described the intruder. "Yes, exactly like that," he replied quickly, his shock evident. A soft laugh escaped the nurse as he waved his hand in understanding. "That weirdo is named Katsuki. Don't worry, he's harmless even though he looks like he would bite someone." His tone was light, but something about the familiarity in his words made Izuku wonder how long this nurse had been dealing with that blonde troublemaker. He couldn't help but question in his head whether the two of them were close or if Katsuki had simply been a long-term patient here, just like he was about to be. Before Izuku could ask anything, a loud voice from the room next door carried through the hallway. "I heard that, old man," the voice yelled, sounding offended. The nurse didn't seem fazed in the slightest. "It's true though," he called back casually, before turning to Izuku again. At that moment, Izuku realized that Katsuki was his next-door neighbor, and a quiet sense of defeat settled heavily in his stomach. He didn't know what he had done in his past life to deserve being placed beside a living noise machine, but apparently fate had decided this for him. The nurse cleared his throat and offered Izuku another small smile. "By the way, my name is Aizawa. I'm the head nurse of this ward. If you ever have any concerns or need help with anything, you can always call for me. I'll also be bringing your daily medications, so we'll see each other often." He stepped further inside the room, taking a moment to look around before asking, "Are you feeling all right now? Is the room to your liking?" Izuku wasn't sure how to answer at first. Although Aizawa seemed friendly, he talked a bit too much for Izuku's taste, especially when Izuku was still adjusting to his first day here. Eventually, he shook his head and spoke softly, choosing honesty despite his discomfort. "Not okay. I don't really like being in hospitals, and I wish things were different." but I don't have a choice. Still, thank you for asking. He tried to smile as naturally as he could, though it was faint and forced. Aizawa studied his face gently and responded, "If you're not okay, then how are you still able to smile like that? If you didn't tell me you disliked being here, I would have thought you were happy about it." He placed a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder and added, "You're not alone in this. All the patients here feel the same way. Being here isn't easy for anyone." Izuku nodded slowly, somewhat comforted by the thought that he wasn't the only one who struggled. He figured he should find something to entertain himself with during the long days ahead, so he asked, would it be possible to get some notebooks? I like writing and drawing, so I thought maybe it would help pass the time." Aizawa's face brightened at the request. "Of course, I'll bring some from the supply room in a little bit," he said, already stepping back toward the hallway. "In the meantime, why don't you dress into the hospital clothes we provided? If you stay in your casual clothes, people might mistake you for a visitor." He gave Izuku a gentle wave before leaving the room quietly, closing the door behind him. Izuku looked down at the formal clothes he still had on, realizing that this would be the last time he could wear anything of his own for a while. He brushed his fingers over the fabric one more time before letting out a soft sigh. He picked up the folded hospital uniform from his bed and began to change into it slowly, feeling the weight of the situation settle deeper into his chest. With each button he fastened, the reality of living here became clearer. Still, he reminded himself that he would try to make the best out of it, even if life had just placed him beside a strange, loud blonde boy with unsettlingly bright red eyes. By 6 in the evening, Izuku finally felt the weight of the long day settling on his shoulders. It had been only 9 hours since he'd officially been admitted, yet the hospital already felt strangely familiar, almost as if time inside this place moved differently. Aizawa had already delivered the notebooks Izuku requested. They were neatly stacked on the bedside table, blank and full of possibility. Izuku stared at the empty first page for nearly 10 minutes, unsure where to begin. He wanted to write something heartfelt or meaningful, something that might help him cope with the next few years he would be living here, but his thoughts felt too disorganized to capture. He set the notebook aside for the moment and leaned back against his pillows, closing his eyes briefly as he listened to the quiet hum of the room. Before he could collect his thoughts again, a voice came from outside his door, muffled but recognizable enough to make him sit up. Someone said it was time to eat. Izuku blinked in confusion, then walked over and opened the door halfway. Standing there, with the same unimpressed expression and messy blonde hair as earlier, was the weird boy who had startled him in his sleep. Izuku felt his body tense. It wasn't fear exactly, but something about this boy made him freeze in place despite his usual friendliness. Where do we eat?" Izuku asked cautiously. "Doesn't Nurse Aizawa usually bring the food to the rooms?" The blonde stared back at him with a sharp, unreadable look. Izuku tried to give him a small smile out of habit, but nothing came out. For some reason, smiling at this boy felt impossible. Then again, the blonde didn't smile at him either, so Izuku didn't see the point in trying too hard. "Everyone eats in the hall at the same time," the blonde answered. His tone was cold and distant, as if the conversation bored him. "If you want to eat alone here, then fine. Do whatever." His words were clipped, his posture stiff, and Izuku immediately felt his irritation rise. He already didn't like this guy. He was rude, grumpy, and difficult to talk to. But as Izuku looked back into his empty room, realizing how sad it felt to imagine eating alone every day for years, he quickly made a decision. Grumpy or not, being alone was worse. "Wait up," he called as the blonde turned to leave. He rushed to put on his slippers and grabbed his thin jacket, sliding it on before stepping out of the room. When he opened the door fully, he found the blonde already staring at him again, eyebrows furrowed like Izuku had done something strange. Izuku blinked, confused. "What? Why are you looking at me like that?" The blonde pointed inside Izuku's room. "Aren't you gonna turn that thing off?" he asked while gesturing toward the small speakers still playing softly on the shelf. "Oh wait, right," Izuku muttered. He hurried back inside and reached to turn it off, but instead of stopping the music completely, it skipped to a new song from his My Hero University playlist. The energetic melody filled the room, and Izuku winced in embarrassment. Oops. Hold on, I'll turn it off. Before he could press the button, the blonde stepped in and switched it off himself. Was that an anime song? He asked, raising an eyebrow sharply. Seriously? Izuku frowned at him. Hey, that was rude. I was going to turn it off myself. You're crazy, the blonde shot back with a scoff. You clearly don't know what you're doing. Come on, we should leave before she gets here. He grabbed Izuku's arm without hesitation, his grip firm but not painful, like he was in a hurry to get them both out safely. Izuku stared at him in confusion, letting himself be pulled because he didn't want trouble. Before who gets here? He asked quietly, wondering if he really was the crazy one for following this unpredictable boy. His question was answered immediately when he looked toward the doorway and saw her. A girl stood blocking the exit, her presence so intense that Izuku felt goosebumps rise across his skin. Her hair was messy and wild, her eyes sharp as though she hadn't blinked in hours. She wore hospital clothing that was slightly wrinkled, giving the impression she had either run a marathon or escaped from somewhere she shouldn't have. Her expression carried no warmth, and Izuku felt a chill run through him. The blonde cursed under his breath. Great. She's already here, he muttered, stepping in front of Izuku instinctively, almost protectively. We're doomed. The girl squinted at them. Was that a My Hero University song I just heard? She asked in a flat tone, but Izuku sensed a dangerous excitement underneath her voice. Izuku's heart thumped loudly as he peeked from behind the blonde, trying to answer without angering her. He nodded slowly, unsure if this was the wrong move. Immediately, the girl placed a hand dramatically over her chest and bit her bottom lip in excitement, her eyes lighting up in a way that made Izuku even more nervous. Are you Uravity biased? She shouted, practically vibrating with energy. Izuku quickly shook his head. And no, I'm Gyra biased, he replied, hoping that answering correctly would calm her down. The girl's expression shifted into a wild, cheerful smile. You should have said so earlier, she exclaimed. Come to my room 066 if you want to listen to My Hero University with me later. She waved enthusiastically. I'm Toga Himiko. Nice to meet you. Room 066? Izuku felt a cold chill. That sounded more like room 666 with how chaotic she seemed, but he forced himself to smile politely. Sure, he replied, trying to not look terrified. I'm Izuku Midder. He was cut off abruptly when the blonde beside him stiffened and turned to face him fully. You're Midoriya? He demanded as if Izuku had personally offended him. Izuku stared back at him in confusion, wondering why his name mattered so much. In his head, he could only think one thing. What is his problem now? But before he could respond, he felt his eyelids closing. Getting dizzy all of a sudden and in an instant, blacks out and faints. Aizawa guided them through the hallway without saying much, though Izuku could see a faint relief in the nurse's tired eyes. It seemed he had been waiting for them to finally reach the dining area, especially with Katsuki and Himiko causing noise from 3 rooms away. Aizawa opened a door at the end of the hall, revealing a surprising space, spacious enough to match Izuku's own room, but warmer and dimmer in its lighting. Izuku stepped inside and immediately noticed a large blanket spread neatly across the polished floor like a picnic setup. Plates and containers full of food sat in the middle, steaming gently, and the sight alone eased some of Izuku's nervousness. Aizawa turned to him with his usual sleepy expression. Are you all right sitting on the floor? He asked. Izuku nodded with a small smile that came more naturally this time. Yes, it's okay. It actually looked inviting, much less formal than a hospital tray next to a stiff bed. Before he could settle in, a calm voice greeted him from the side. Welcome. You must be the new kid. Izuku turned to see a boy sitting near one edge of the blanket. His hair was divided in color, white on one side and a deep red on the other. His eyes reflected the same pattern, one blue, one gray, and a faint scar traced down from the corner of his left, bluer eye. Despite the unusual appearance, his expression was soft and composed. Izuku returned the greeting with a warm smile. Hello. It's nice to meet you. From all the introductions he'd experienced today, this boy, this gentle-looking, calm boy, was definitely the most normal person he had encountered. Before he could take another step closer, fingers suddenly hooked around the back of his shirt and pulled him down. "Sit down," Himiko exclaimed, tugging him onto the blanket with an excitement that startled him. Izuku landed ungracefully on the soft fabric and quickly steadied himself. Himiko sat beside him, eyes shining with a slightly manic energy that made Izuku both nervous and strangely relieved. At least she was enthusiastic. Still, her next words sent a sharp chill through him. She leaned toward his ear and whispered in a voice that dropped several shades darker, "If you ever decide to be Miwadesu biased, I won't hesitate to stab you over and over until you bleed out on the floor." Her face was completely serious, and Izuku's heart thumped wildly, his breath catching in his throat as his eyes widened. He stared at her nervously. "Wise, ma'am," he muttered with a stiff nod, fully understanding that this was not a girl he wanted to test. Himiko giggled a second later, almost sweetly, as if she hadn't just threatened his life. "You're such a weird guy. Fainting out of nowhere like that," she added as she picked up a piece of chicken from the bowl. Before Izuku could even respond, the blonde guy, who sat beside the calm boy with his arms crossed, picked up a chicken fillet and threw it at Himiko's face without hesitation. "Shut up," he muttered loudly. Himiko flinched, blinking as the fillet bounced off her cheek and fell into her lap. She wiped the crumbs and smudges away with a pouty frown. "Oh, Katsuki, that hurt?" "Izuku really is strange, but also amazing," she said while dusting herself off. Izuku looked at Katsuki for a moment. The blonde still seemed irritated, but the way he acted almost felt familiar. Izuku remembered the nurse saying his name earlier, Katsuki. It was a cute name, Izuku admitted to himself, though he shook the thought away immediately, embarrassed even in his own mind. He ended up sitting between Aizawa and Himiko. He felt relief that he wasn't placed beside Katsuki. The grumpy blonde sat between Himiko and the quiet boy with heterochromia, still glaring at his food as if offended by its existence. Izuku wondered if Katsuki was always like that or if he was simply having one of those days. Once everyone settled, Aizawa finally straightened a little. "Starting today," he said, poking his finger lazily at each of them in turn, "the four of you will be eating together. The more, the merrier, or something like that." He pointed first to Izuku, then to Himiko, then Katsuki, and finally to the calm boy. "For now, the only patients admitted in this ward are you four. Izuku, Himiko, Katsuki, and Shoto." Izuku felt a warmth spread across his chest. It had been so long since he had sat in a group. The idea of having companions, even if one threatened to stab him and another looked constantly irritated, filled him with a timid happiness. He glanced at Shoto again, who offered him a small nod of acknowledgement, gentle and sincere. Izuku thought to himself that Shoto seemed nice. Aizawa was blunt but comforting in his own way. Himiko, never mind, he couldn't figure her out. And Katsuki? He still wasn't sure, but maybe there was something decent under all that loudness. Shoto turned slightly toward the blonde beside him and asked quietly, "Why are you so quiet all of a sudden, Katsuki?" All eyes shifted toward Katsuki. Izuku was confused. Wasn't Katsuki always like this? Quiet and grumpy seemed like his standard personality. Still, everyone waited for his answer. Aizawa laughed slowly at everyone's reaction. Before Katsuki could say anything, a chicken fillet flew across the blanket and hit Aizawa squarely in the face. Aizawa didn't visibly react for a moment. Izuku blinked several times, wondering if this was normal behavior here. Himiko snickered. Shoto sighed. Izuku simply stared. He wondered if Katsuki was fond of wasting chicken fillets or if throwing them was his emotional coping mechanism. Shoto was the first to break the brief silence they all settled into after Katsuki's random chicken attack. He had been quiet the entire time, calmly eating, but when Aizawa began to explain why Izuku had been admitted, his expression shifted, not with fear, but genuine surprise. "He can sleep for how long?" Shoto asked, his brows pulling together slightly. Aizawa rubbed his forehead as if already tired of repeating himself, though his voice remained patient. "His condition causes him to faint frequently and, in more severe episodes, fall into prolonged sleep. Last time, he was out for about a year. Izuku felt the attention shift toward him. It wasn't a heavy silence, but it made his chest tighten. He fidgeted with the edge of the blanket. I don't know why it happens either, he admitted. I wish I did. He forced a small smile, even though it felt strained, and glanced between the three teens around him. What about you? What are your sicknesses? As soon as the question left his mouth, everything went still. Himiko paused with her chopsticks in midair. Shoto's eyes drifted away. Katsuki looked like he was about to snap. Aizawa cleared his throat. We don't talk about our conditions here, the nurse said firmly but not unkindly. Everyone has their own battles. Good vibes only at the dinner table. Izuku blinked. Oh. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. He looked down at the food that was slowly losing its warmth. It wasn't fair. Aizawa had told them all about his condition, yet he wasn't allowed to know anything about the others. The imbalance felt like an invisible weight on his shoulders. Aizawa didn't explain further, and the meal continued in lighter, unrelated conversation, though Izuku stayed quieter, thinking about it. After they finished eating, Himiko stretched her arms dramatically. Well, I'm stuffed, she announced with a grin. I'm gonna head back to my room and watch some My Hero University reruns. If you hear me screaming at the TV, mind your business. She stood and dusted off crumbs from her skirt. See you later, Zuzu, she sang before skipping off. Izuku watched her go, puzzled. She seemed perfectly healthy, energetic even. He wondered what her sickness could possibly be if she could run, jump, scream, and binge her favorite show on the TV in her room. Nothing about her screamed, patient, except maybe the unstable obsession with fictional characters. But even that felt normal enough. Not long after, Shoto rose to his feet and offered Izuku a polite nod. It was nice meeting you. Let's talk again later. Izuku nodded back, and this time the smile came easily. Yeah, I'd like that. Shoto's expression softened ever so slightly before he slipped out of the room. Izuku watched the door close behind him, thinking that Shoto was genuinely cute, calm, kind, easy to talk to. There was something comforting about him. A loud scoff came from the other side of the blanket. Don't smile at him like that. Izuku turned to see Katsuki glaring at the spot where Shoto had been standing. The blonde crossed his arms stubbornly and muttered, He's a manipulative little fucker. Izuku blinked rapidly. Echa? But he seems really nice. He seems a lot of things, Katsuki snapped, grabbing a leftover chicken fillet and taking a huge bite out of pure irritation. Don't let him trick you. Shoto's voice floated from the hallway before he disappeared completely. I'm not tricking anyone. By the way, I'm not used to your attitude right now. What could have made you act so aggressive? Katsuki cursed under his breath in response and angrily chewed the rest of his food. Izuku stared, confused. As Shoto didn't get any response, he calmly left the room and gently closes the door behind him. Izuku hugged his knees subconsciously. Katsuki kept chewing in silence, brows furrowed like he was trying to solve a math equation he hated. Izuku couldn't help but wonder, what exactly was Katsuki like before? Was this grumpy, aggressive personality always him? Or was he acting like this because of something that happened? Izuku didn't know, but the question stuck in his mind as Aizawa began gathering food containers. Katsuki aggressively finished his meal. Katsuki finally stood up with a grunt, still refusing to look at him. Izuku watched the blonde walk away and wondered what kind of person Katsuki Bakugo truly was beneath all that fire and noise. And why he suddenly cared to know. It was almost 11 p.m., but Izuku was still awake and staring at the wall across his bed, specifically at the collage of My Hero University posters he had taped up earlier. The characters, vibrant and heroic, seemed to stare back at him from their fictional world. He should have been asleep. He knew he should. But every time he tried to let his eyes close, a heavy fear pressed down on his chest. What if he slept too long again? What if he woke up to another world where everything shifted, changed, moved on without him? He clutched his pillow tighter, trying to calm his thoughts. The soft hum of his mini speaker played a low, comforting song, but even that couldn't silence the anxiety twisting deep inside him. From the other room, a voice broke through the quiet like an irritated thunderclap. "Fing Deku, if you can't sleep, drink some sleeping pills. The music you're blaring is so loud I can't sleep." The door to his room creaked open just enough for a blonde head to peek in. Katsuki leaned against the frame, arms crossed, red eyes half-lidded with annoyance. Izuku forced a sarcastic smile. "You know it's a trend to knock." Katsuki rolled his eyes so hard Izuku thought they might fall out. "Not a trend for me." His shoulders lifted in a mock cheerful shrug. Also, he stretched his mouth into the most miserable attempt at a smile Izuku had ever seen. "Here's my knock." Izuku couldn't help the sudden snort that escaped him. He didn't know whether to be offended, amused, or concerned. The grumpy, sickly blonde making faces at him was strangely adorable, but more than that, he looked stupid doing it, and Izuku's brain could not process it any other way. Katsuki's irritation flared instantly. "Oi, what the hell are you laughing at?" he snapped as he pushed the door open all the way and marched straight into the room like he owned it. He immediately reached over and switched off Izuku's speaker again, exactly like last time. Izuku dropped his head back against his pillow, exasperated. "Your face," he muttered. "It's too funny." Katsuki froze mid-step and pointed aggressively at himself. "The hell do you mean, funny? This face is premium quality. You should be thrilled to even be looking at it." That made Izuku burst into laughter again, harder than before. The ridiculous confidence, the indignation, the way Katsuki's eyebrows scrunched like he was carrying the weight of the world, Izuku couldn't hold it in. He laughed until tears welled up in his eyes, and he kept laughing even as his stomach hurt from it. But then the laughter caught in his throat. It collapsed into an emotion he couldn't shove down anymore. His breath hitched. The tears that had gathered from laughing spilled down faster, heavier. The sound of laughter faded, replaced by tight, silent sobs as Izuku pressed a shaking hand over his mouth, trying desperately not to let any noise escape. He didn't want Katsuki of all people to hear him cry like this. He didn't want anyone to. His chest felt too small, too tight, like his heart was being squeezed until it might burst. His thoughts spiraled, his sickness, the hospital, his mother's goodbye earlier, the fear of sleeping again, the loneliness pressing at the edges of his mind. Everything felt too heavy, too overwhelming. Katsuki, who had been gearing up to yell, abruptly stopped. His expression shifted from irritation to shock as Izuku crumpled in on himself. "Hey, what? Are you the hell? Are you crying?" Katsuki stepped back like he had stepped on a bomb. Izuku tried to shake his head even though tears were falling uncontrollably. Katsuki hovered near the edge of the bed, not knowing whether to get closer or run away. Take a minute to breathe, Annette," he muttered, voice rough but not cruel. "What's your deal? Are you going crazy or something?" Izuku tried to swallow down every shaky breath, wiping hurriedly at his face even though the tears weren't stopping. He truly tried to pull another smile on his lips, the kind he always used to mask everything. His cheeks trembled, but he managed to shape something resembling a smile as he looked up at Katsuki. Sorry," he whispered, breath hitching. "You should go back to your room." "I'm fine." "Really?" Katsuki stared at him for a moment, jaw tightening. It was obvious he didn't believe him. No one could possibly look at Izuku's blotchy face and shaking shoulders and call it fine. But Katsuki didn't argue. With a grunt and one more unreadable look, he backed away, turned on his heel, and left without another word. The door clicked shut and Izuku's tears broke loose again. The moment he was alone, everything crumbled. His face buried into the blanket as his whole body shook with silent sobs. His lips trembled, his hands trembled harder. He didn't bother trying to hide the sounds anymore. His chest felt too tight, as if the air didn't know how to stay inside him. Maybe crying like this, disgusting, messy, unfiltered, would help. Maybe if he finally let it out, the pressure in his chest would stop building and building like a balloon about to burst. He felt exhausted. Exhausted from smiling every day. Exhausted from pretending that he was okay. Exhausted from being seen as strong when he wasn't. Everyone thought he was cheerful, positive, and resilient. But no one knew how much Izuku swallowed down, how much he forced behind locked teeth, how much hurt he shoved into the cracks of his heart just to keep people from worrying. He curled into himself, forehead pressed to his knees, breathing uneven and broken. He didn't know how long he cried, just that eventually his sobs slowed, the tears lingering on his cheeks cooling in the air. Caramel-flavored ice cream always makes me feel better. Try it. Izuku jolted, eyes snapping upward in surprise. Katsuki stood in the doorway again. He wasn't yelling this time. He wasn't scowling either. His expression was unreadable, like he was trying hard to pretend he wasn't doing something kind. In his hands was a large bowl filled to the brim with ice cream, creamy swirls under the soft light of Izuku's lamp. 2 spoons were sticking out of it. Katsuki stepped closer without waiting for permission. Izuku hurriedly wiped his face, embarrassed. The tears didn't stop in time, but he tried to make himself look less wrecked. Katsuki, however, didn't comment on it. He just held out 1 spoon. Izuku hesitated for a moment, then took it gently. The cold metal grounded him immediately. "Thank you," he whispered, voice still trembling. Ice cream, of all things, hit him right in the heart, soft memories of childhood, small joys, little comforts. He scooped some from the bowl, but right before he could take a bite, Katsuki's spoon blocked his. "Not here," Katsuki muttered. "Let's go to the rooftop." Izuku blinked. "Echa? Why?" Katsuki didn't answer. He just began walking toward the hallway, carrying the bowl as if this were a perfectly normal situation. Izuku scrambled after him, clutching the spoon before it slipped from his hand. "Wait. I'm not allowed to go beyond my room at this hour," Izuku said nervously, wiping the last of the tears off his cheeks as he hurried to keep up. Katsuki stopped just long enough to glance back at him with a raised brow. "I'm not allowed either," he said plainly. "But who cares?" Izuku's mouth opened and closed, speechless. Katsuki just turned away again and continued walking, casual and unbothered, as if breaking rules was part of his daily routine. Izuku held the spoon close to his chest, heart still fragile but slowly warming. The moment they stepped onto the rooftop, a cold wind swept past them. Izuku shivered, hugging his arms as the night air wrapped around his skin. Midnight stretched across the horizon, the darkness broken only by the glitter of stars scattered over the sky. Despite the chill, the view was breathtaking. From up here, the city lights twinkled like fallen constellations, and the silence felt different, softer, calmer, almost warm. Izuku felt tired from the climb, his legs a little wobbly, but the moment he saw the night sky, he knew it was worth it. "It's beautiful," he whispered, almost in awe. Katsuki didn't say anything at first. He simply took off his orange jacket, spread it across the concrete, and dropped down onto it like he'd done this 100 times. He motioned for Izuku to sit. Izuku followed, taking a seat beside him. He finally let himself taste the ice cream, the sweetness melting over his tongue in slow, comforting coldness. "The whole hospital is hell," Katsuki said after a moment, scooping some ice cream for himself. "This place is the only one that isn't." Izuku smiled gently and looked down embarrassed. "Sorry, for earlier," he murmured. "For crying. You shouldn't have had to see that." To him, they were still strangers, barely acquaintances. Breaking down in front of Katsuki felt humiliating, like exposing too much of himself too quickly. Katsuki snorted. "I've been here since I was a kid. I'm basically immune to weird shit." He nudged Izuku's foot with his own. "Welcome to hell, Deku." Izuku let out a tiny laugh, but it faded into a yawn. He tensed immediately, bringing a hand to his lips as if he could shove the sleepiness back down his throat. "But now. Not here." Not while he was finally feeling a little normal. Katsuki glanced at him. "You already sleepy?" Izuku hugged his knees tighter. "Unfortunately." "Don't want to sleep?" Katsuki asked, leaning back on his palms and staring up at the stars. Izuku rested his chin on his knees. "Yeah. I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "Every time I sleep, something changes. I don't want to wake up to another year missing." He smiled again, small and sad, and lifted his head to look at the sky like Katsuki. "So I stay awake as long as I can." "Here," Katsuki said, reaching into his pocket and handing him something metal. Izuku blinked. A tweezer? You can use it to pull out your nose hairs, Katsuki said confidently, as if he were giving medical advice. Guaranteed you won't feel sleepy after. Pain wakes you right up. Izuku stared at him, horrified. What? Oh, clean it first, Katsuki added casually. Aizawa uses that for his armpits. And those things stink like death. Izuku let out a shriek and practically threw the tweezer off the rooftop. Katsuki! That's disgusting. Katsuki smirked smugly. What? I'm cleaner than anyone here. Izuku groaned, half failing to hide a laugh behind his hand. Maybe this was what Shoto meant earlier. This playful, annoying, teasing version of Katsuki must have been the original one before all the grumpiness buried it. Katsuki caught him staring and raised a brow. Don't look at me too hard. You might fall in love with me. Izuku's face flushed instantly. He turned away so fast his neck almost snapped. I wasn't staring, he hissed, cursing quietly under his breath. I just remembered something. Katsuki leaned closer, eyes narrowing suspiciously. Yeah? What? You look like a dog, Izuku said, smirking as he watched Katsuki's eyebrow twitch. A little tease wouldn't hurt. Katsuki grunted and stuffed another spoonful of ice cream into his mouth like he was punishing it. Izuku giggled softly, but he quickly shifted the topic. How have you lived here for so long? Doesn't it feel lonely? Katsuki paused, the humor slipping away just a little. Don't know, actually. He shrugged, his voice dropping to something almost thoughtful. Maybe, 'cause I tried to be strong. Maybe, 'cause the old stick Aizawa's here, so that BS gives me one more reason not to croak. He gestured vaguely to the empty air. You're lucky, you know. You got assigned to Zero Ward. We're like a family here at this point. Everyone else. Izuku listened, truly wanting to hear everything Katsuki had to say, but something was wrong. At first, the wind felt colder. Then the lights blurred at the edges. Katsuki's voice, steady and rough, began to fade as if someone was turning down the volume knob in Izuku's ears. His heartbeat thudded too hard, too slow, too irregular. Not now. Please, not now. Izuku blinked rapidly, fighting to keep his eyes open, but his eyelids felt impossibly heavy. The ice cream spoon fell from his fingers. No, he didn't want to faint. Not here. Not alone on a rooftop. Not in front of someone he barely knew. He clutched at his knees, trying to ground himself, but everything around him tilted. Katsuki's voice sounded distant now, worried, sharp. Deku? Oi hey! Don't you dare! Izuku's vision darkened. His body slumped sideways. But he couldn't stop it. Everything went black. Let's bet he wakes up today. What if he doesn't? I'll tell Himiko straight to her face that her precious My Hero University S is like but. What if I'm right? Then I'll tell Himiko that My Hero University S is. Izuku heard voices before anything else, sharp whispers overlapping, tugging him slowly back toward consciousness. His mind felt foggy, thick like he had been trapped underwater. His eyelids twitched, resisting, but the noise continued until his awareness returned enough for him to force them open. Light filtered into his blurry vision, and he blinked several times, trying to make sense of the shapes in front of him. Everything was soft, like watercolors smudged at the edges. He pushed himself up quickly, sitting upright on his bed with a sudden yawn. You guys are too loud, he blurted out instinctively, not even aware he was practically shouting until he heard the startled shift of movement from across the room. His vision sharpened little by little, revealing the two figures near the foot of his bed. Even without seeing clearly, he could recognize their silhouettes anywhere by now. Katsuki, the calmer voice said, tone flat but slightly trembling, I'm backing out of this bet? Izuku blinked again. Shoto and Katsuki. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his palms and wondered, not for the first time, why he wasn't allowed to lock his diamond door. Privacy didn't exist in Zero Ward, apparently. He furrowed his eyebrows, glaring sleepily at them before yawning again. How long did I sleep this time? He asked, still stretching his neck as he tried to wake up fully. His voice came out quieter now, almost groggy. Shoto, who was now on a wheelchair, looked at him with a face so pale Izuku almost burst into laughter then and there. Shoto's calm exterior cracked just enough to show genuine worry, and Izuku could guess immediately who lost the bet. Izuku couldn't help a tired laugh. "Shoto, you look like you saw a ghost." Shoto exhaled shakily, clearly relieved but too dignified to admit it. Katsuki stood beside him with his arms crossed, smirking like he knew everything that was happening and was proud of it. "Your sleep was only by hours," he said, slightly smug. "Barely half the night." Izuku let out a sigh of relief that felt warm all the way to his fingertips. An hours-long sleep. Not a week. Not a month. Not a year. He let himself smile, wide and genuine, at the simple gift of it. But then something tugged at the back of his mind, an image, a memory, the rooftop night air, the stars, the sound of Katsuki's voice slowly fading. Izuku's smile faltered as he looked down at himself. He was in his bed, neatly tucked in. His jacket was nowhere in sight. His slippers were placed beside the bed. Everything around him was exactly as if he had simply gone to sleep peacefully in his room. "I fainted," he whispered, the realization tightening his chest. "On the rooftop." His eyes widened as he looked at the two boys. How did I get here?" he asked, voice rising in a mix of confusion and embarrassment. I remember falling asleep up there." Katsuki's smirk vanished, replaced by a look that flickered between annoyance and something far more complicated. Shoto didn't say anything. He just stared at Izuku quietly, as if the answer was obvious. Izuku felt a tiny sting in his chest. Has someone carried him? Had someone stayed with him until he woke up? Has someone panicked? His gaze slowly drifted to Katsuki. "Katsuki, please, I beg you," Shoto said in the flattest yet most desperate voice Izuku had ever heard, even as Katsuki dragged his wheelchair down the hallway like he was hauling a piece of stubborn luggage. "I know you know I can't feel pain, but Himiko will kill me. I'm still too young to die. Don't you have any sympathy for me?" Izuku blinked at that. Can't feel pain? Was that Shoto's condition? That explained a lot. The calm demeanor, the lack of reaction, the reason Katsuki used him as the losing bet participant. Still, seeing Shoto's pale face wobbling on the wheelchair made Izuku feel genuinely sorry for him. "Shoto's right," Izuku said softly, walking beside them. "I actually feel bad. He looks miserable." Shoto, despite his attempt at stoicism, turned even paler. "It's your fault I'm in this mess. You woke up too soon," he complained, sounding betrayed. Izuku stared at him, offended. "How is it my fault that I didn't sleep for a year this time?" Shoto sighed dramatically, leaning back as if preparing for death. "If only you slept another hour, maybe I would have won." Izuku opened his mouth in disbelief. "I can't believe you're blaming me for waking up alive." "Katsuki, faster," Izuku said suddenly, switching sides instantly. "Escort this guy to Himiko." Katsuki barked out a delighted laugh, gave Izuku a thumbs up and an evil grin, and immediately increased speed. Shoto's wheelchair jerked forward. No, Katsuki, please wait, Izuku, I take it back, it was a joke dash." Shoto's voice cracked like someone experiencing emotion for the first time in his life. Instead of pity, Izuku burst into laughter. Shoto had been so calm and expressionless since he arrived, but now he was gripping the wheelchair armrests like it was a roller coaster heading straight into hell. And Himiko's room was hell if she found out they insulted My Hero University. They reached room the door, decorated with stickers, scribbles, and a giant My Hero University poster, looked as intimidating as a courtroom entrance. "This is it, Shoto," Katsuki said seriously as he placed a hand on his shoulder. "Time to man the F up." Shoto looked like he was ready to write his will. Katsuki reached for the door, but before he could touch the handle, a voice behind them cut through the hallway. "Bakugo! Stop!" All three froze like they had just been caught stealing snacks. Aizawa stood there with a box of pizza in his hand, hair messy, eyes half dead, and his expression saying, "I'm too tired for this sheet." It wasn't even anger. It was disappointment mixed with exhaustion. "Why?" he asked slowly, Are the three of you gathered at Himiko's door? Katsuki hid his hands behind his back immediately, trying to appear innocent. Izuku and Shoto stood straighter and all three of them suddenly looked like guilty children awaiting punishment. Aizawa didn't even bother scolding them at first. He simply held the pizza box up and all three boys lunged toward him at the same time. Well, not exactly all. Shoto lunged emotionally because his body was still stuck in the wheelchair. Aizawa held the box above his head like he was protecting treasure. If you're planning mischief, he warned Katsuki without looking, do not involve Himiko. Her parents are in the room. They need privacy. Katsuki's evil grin disappeared instantly, replaced with a tight frown. Her parents are here? Whatever. Izuku blinked, surprised. Are her parents strict? Aizawa sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Not strict. Himiko is just a troubled girl. They're talking. They need space. All three boys went quiet for a moment. Aizawa then opened the pizza box slightly, enough for the warm smell to drift out. If you want some, go to Shoto's room. That was all Katsuki needed to hear. Move it, he said as he grabbed the wheelchair handles again and turned Shoto around like he was steering a boat. Wait, slow down. Shoto protested, gripping the armrests once again. Izuku jogged after them, already laughing at the ridiculousness of the situation. But halfway down the hall, he paused. Actually, I haven't showered yet, he said, scratching his cheek as he realized how gross he probably felt after fainting on the rooftop. I'll go catch up with you guys later. Don't take forever, Katsuki called back without looking. You smell fine, Midoriya, Shoto added politely then paused. Actually, no. You smell like rooftop dust. Izuku raised his voice. That is not a scent, Shoto. After his shower, Izuku stepped out into the cool air of his room, towel draped loosely around his neck and hair damp enough to cling to his forehead. The warmth of the water had loosened the tension in his muscles, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he felt somewhat refreshed. But that peaceful feeling shattered almost immediately when he noticed that someone else had entered his room while he was gone. A small boy stood near the foot of his bed, staring at him with an expression far too unimpressed for someone so young. He couldn't have been older than 7, judging by his height and the childish pajama set he wore. The little cap on his head had tiny horns attached to it, giving him a mischievous, almost cartoonish appearance that contrasted sharply with the flat look on his face. Izuku blinked in surprise before offering him a polite smile, the kind he always defaulted to when caught off guard. Hi there, he said gently. Are you lost or something? Why are you in my room? The kid didn't hesitate at all. You look really stupid when you smile, he said, completely deadpan, as if he were making an observation about the weather. Izuku felt his jaw drop. That's rude. You can't just say that. He stared at the kid, offended that he was getting roasted by a 7-year-old he hadn't even met before. How old are you anyway? I'm 7, the boy replied without any shame or even the slightest embarrassment. Izuku sighed heavily, already tired from this unexpected interaction. He decided that maybe bribery was the best way to deal with this miniature menace. Do you want chocolate? He asked in defeat, thinking that maybe giving the kid something sweet would soften his attitude. The transformation was immediate. The boy's eyes brightened with interest. Yes. Izuku couldn't help a small laugh and walked toward his drawer, rummaging for the small stash of chocolates he kept hidden away. It took a while since he had buried them under some notebooks, but when he finally found one and turned around to hand it to the kid, the room was perfectly empty again. The space where the child had stood was now vacant, as though he had never been there at all. Before Izuku could process the odd disappearance, someone knocked once and pushed the door open without waiting. Katsuki stepped inside, looking irritated as usual. Deku, Aizawa's calling for you, he said with his familiar sharpness. Izuku groaned dramatically. Can you not call me that? Shut up, Kaken. The nickname slipped out naturally before he could stop it, and Katsuki's eye twitched as soon as he heard it. However, Katsuki's irritation quickly shifted to curiosity when he noticed the chocolates in Izuku's hands. Where'd you get that? Give me some, he demanded, stepping closer as if he could take it by force. Izuku held the chocolates behind his back. No. You don't get any. Also, actually never mind that. Did you see a kid near my room just now? Katsuki's entire posture changed. His shoulders stiffened, and his expression tensed as he stared at Izuku more seriously than usual. What kid? He asked quietly, as though he feared the answer. Izuku described the child, the cap with horns, the pajamas, the way he had stood in the middle of the room like he belonged there. Katsuki stared at him with clear confusion that slowly turned into something else, something unsteady. There's no kid here, he said, his brows furrowing deeper. 7-year-olds aren't even allowed in this ward. They're all in another building. Nobody that age is assigned here. Izuku felt the back of his neck prickle uncomfortably. Katsuki, I'm serious. I talked to him. He was literally right here. Katsuki stepped closer as if examining Izuku's face for signs of fever or delirium. Deku, listen. If the kid had a cap with horns on it, you shouldn't joke about that. That's messed up. Izuku stared at him, feeling his heartbeat pick up speed in his chest. I'm not joking, he insisted, his voice trembling just slightly. But what's the problem with the cap? Katsuki exhaled as if debating whether to continue or drop the subject entirely. His expression hardened into something unreadable, and after a long pause, he finally answered. There really was a kid like that. But Izuku leaned forward, heart pounding. But what? He asked, voice soft but tense. You're scaring me. Katsuki held his gaze for a moment before replying. That kid died yesterday. Izuku felt his blood run cold. His entire body stiffened, and the fear rooted him in place. He wanted to move, wanted to check the hallway, wanted to convince himself that the boy he saw was real, but his legs refused to cooperate. A chill ran through him so intensely that the hairs on his arms stood up. Katsuki watched him freeze, then the corner of his mouth twitched upward. It took a second to register, but it became clear almost immediately. Katsuki was fighting a grin. A moment later, he broke into a laugh that filled the entire room. "In it your face?" he howled, wiping his eyes. "I can't believe you fell for that. The kid's in my room right now eating my ice cream, you absolute idiot." Izuku's shocked expression twisted straight into fury. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles paled. "Bakugo Katsuki," he said with enough tension in his voice to make Katsuki take a step back. Izuku lunged for the nearest slipper on the floor and brandished it like a weapon. Katsuki bolted toward the door the moment he saw Izuku's shoulders shift. "Nope. Nope, I'm out," he shouted, still laughing. Izuku hurled the slipper with impressive force, and it struck the doorframe just as Katsuki escaped through it, still wearing a smug grin. "I hate you so much," Izuku yelled, stomping toward the doorway to retrieve his slipper, though a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips despite his annoyance. Katsuki's laughter echoed down the hall, and Izuku knew he was probably joining the others in Shoto's room already, leaving Izuku to cool off before following. By the time the clock hit 6 in the evening, the four of them had finished eating inside Katsuki's room. It wasn't the cleanest place for a dinner gathering, but Aizawa had learned to stop questioning the choices of the teenagers. Shoto had quietly suggested eating somewhere less chaotic, Himiko had already stolen half of Katsuki's snacks, and Izuku had spent the entire dinner dodging Katsuki's sudden flicks, pokes, and half-serious attempts to scare him with fake ghost stories. Apparently, Katsuki saw him as the perfect new target for all the mischief he had been saving up over the years. Izuku found it ridiculous how many people in the hospital feared Katsuki, but it made sense after hearing the stories. Almost everyone in the ward had at one point been the victim of Katsuki's pranks: salt in drinks, ice under pillows, plastic spiders in drawers, and the occasional wheelchair sabotage. Now Izuku, for some unknown cosmic reason, was considered the luckiest because Katsuki had decided to focus on him. Izuku personally thought it was less lucky and more bullying, but nobody else seemed inclined to agree. Once he escaped Katsuki's room, Izuku returned to his own sanctuary. He pulled out his phone and settled onto his study table with a sigh. Determined not to fall asleep that night, he began downloading a handful of movies, mystery, comedy, anything to keep him awake until morning. The sky outside was already darkening, and he felt that familiar anxiety settle on his shoulders, But he tried to distract himself with the loading screens and the tiny percentage bars moving slowly. He was just beginning to feel a little more relaxed when his door creaked open again. Izuku looked up, expecting Aizawa or Shoto, but instead, the kid from earlier walked in. Same cap, same small frame, same unimpressed expression. What made Izuku's eye twitch was the person walking in behind him. Katsuki. Of course. Izuku stared at them as the kid marched confidently up to him. You shouldn't stand so close to him, Izuku warned jokingly, pointing at Katsuki. You might get ugly too. Katsuki grunted in response, unimpressed, while the kid looked up at Izuku with a grin that was far too wicked for a 7-year-old. Without asking permission, because apparently no one respected Izuku's room, Katsuki lifted the kid onto the bed, then flopped down beside him. The bed dipped from Katsuki's weight, and the two of them laughed like they were in their own living room instead of Izuku's private space. Izuku's mouth dropped open in disbelief. This was his bed. Not Katsuki's playground. The kid nudged Katsuki's arm and giggled. You were right, Katsuki. He is pretty. Both Izuku and Katsuki froze. Their eyes met instantly, neither sure how to react. Izuku stared, confused and flustered, while Katsuki looked like he wanted to hurl himself off the bed. The awkward silence didn't last long because Katsuki quickly cleared his throat, puffed up his chest, and tried to salvage the situation with brute force. Pretty? Pretty stupid, maybe, he snapped, immediately grabbing the kid and tickling him without mercy as punishment for the accidental compliment. The kid shrieked with laughter and tried to squirm away, but Katsuki kept one arm around him while his fingers attacked the kid's sides. Izuku, though annoyed by the bed invasion, couldn't help the small laugh that escaped him. It was chaotic, messy, and loud, yet somehow heartwarming to watch the usually grumpy Katsuki act like a teasing older brother. Get off me, Katsuki. You're too heavy, the kid protested between laughs, trying to push Katsuki away with zero success. Katsuki only grinned wider and dug his fingers in harder, enjoying every second of the struggle. Izuku crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow, deciding it was the perfect moment to take revenge for earlier. Really? So Katsuki said I'm pretty? He asked casually, smirking when Katsuki immediately tried to cover the kid's mouth. The kid dodged his hand and yelled, yes, before collapsing into giggles again as Katsuki resumed tickling him. Katsuki's ears turned a faint shade of red, and he tried burying the kid in his arms to silence him, but the small boy kept kicking wildly, causing them both to roll around on Izuku's bed and wrinkle the sheets that Izuku had just straightened earlier. Izuku let out a long, dramatic sigh, though he couldn't hide his amusement completely. The scene in front of him looked like Katsuki wrestling a hyperactive puppy, and the kid's laughter filled the room, making it feel strangely lighter. Even if he would never admit it, Izuku felt something warm curl in his chest as he watched them. The hospital didn't feel as cold tonight. And even though Katsuki's mischief was exhausting, Izuku almost found it comforting, like someone was trying in their own loud and annoying way to keep him awake, keep him laughing, and keep him here. Even if Katsuki was, in fact, still a BSRD. Time check, 2:18 a.m. Izuku still couldn't sleep no matter how many times he tossed around. His body felt heavy, but his mind refused to calm down, replaying Katsuki's stupid almost compliment over and over. Katsuki's pretty stupid insult had been meant to cover up something else, something not yet confirmed, something that turned Izuku's ears warm whenever he thought about it. He wanted to sleep just so he could forget how embarrassed he felt. Whenever Izuku felt this way, he usually calmed himself by eating something. He checked his mini fridge and sighed when he saw it empty. Maybe the cafeteria still had snacks. He grabbed his jacket and his notebook, the one he kept so he could write down moments he was scared to lose. Writing always brought him a strange sort of peace. If he couldn't control his condition, at least he could control his words on paper. If life refused to be kind, at least his notebook remembered everything he refused to say out loud. Carefully, he opened his door and peeked into the hallway. Aizawa patrolled near the elevator sometimes, so Izuku chose the stairs instead. He moved slowly, hoping the floor didn't creak loud enough to betray him. When he reached the middle of the stairwell, someone stood blocking the steps. The hoodie made him assume it was Katsuki. Izuku almost turned around, still too flustered to deal with their awkward moments. He was about to retreat quietly and pretend he never saw anything, but something in the air felt wrong. Katsuki wasn't standing still, he was leaning heavily against the railing, shoulders rising and falling in harsh, uneven breaths like each inhale hurt him. Izuku's heart dropped when he saw the blood staining Katsuki's mouth and falling onto his hoodie. Katsuki? Izuku hurried down the stairs before he could stop himself. Katsuki jerked in surprise, he turned slightly, and the dim stairwell light revealed something that froze Izuku's entire body: blood. Not just a little, dark red streaks smeared across Katsuki's mouth, staining his chin, dripping onto his hoodie. More leaked from between his lips every time he tried to cough, and he gripped the handrail so tightly his knuckles were bone white. Izuku rushed down the steps so quickly he nearly tripped and stopped right in front of him. Katsuki tried to open his mouth to speak, but another cough tore through him, splattering more blood across his sleeve as he covered his mouth. His other hand pressed firmly against his chest. He couldn't get enough air, each breath sounded thin, ragged, uneven. With what little strength he had, Katsuki motioned for Izuku to stay back. Izuku ignored the gesture and moved closer. Hey, look at me," Izuku said softly. He gently took Katsuki's cold, trembling hand, surprising even himself. Katsuki's eyes widened, startled by the contact, but he couldn't pull away without losing balance. Then he wiped the blood from Katsuki's mouth using his own jacket sleeve. Katsuki stared at him, breathing unevenly, then slowly matched Izuku's inhale. For a moment, their breaths synced, and Katsuki's chest stopped trembling as violently. The silence felt thick but steady. When Katsuki's breathing calmed, he pulled away and gripped his hoodie near his chest. He coughed a few more times and tried to wipe the blood with his fist, pretending he was fine. Katsuki glared weakly. "I know how to breathe," he managed to rasp, though the words were barely audible. Izuku reached into his pocket and took out a clean handkerchief. "Just use this," he said gently. "You can wash it later. I won't complain." Katsuki looked at the handkerchief like Izuku had handed him a bomb. He didn't take it, only frowned at Izuku with equal parts irritation and confusion. So Izuku, sighing dramatically, stepped forward and gently used the handkerchief himself, wiping the blood from Katsuki's lips and jaw. The blonde stiffened, eyes snapping away toward the stairs, cheeks faintly red despite his pale face. When Izuku stepped back, Katsuki finally managed a breath that didn't wheeze. His voice was rough when he spoke. "Why the hell are you out of your room?" Izuku tucked the handkerchief into Katsuki's hand despite his protests. "Snacks," he said simply, shrugging. "The cafeteria might still be open. Come with me. My treat." Katsuki blinked at him, confused. "The F makes you think I want to eat right now?" Izuku smiled gently. "I didn't ask if you wanted to. I'm asking if you'll come with me." Katsuki clicked his tongue and looked away, but he pocketed the handkerchief. And that was answer enough. Izuku glanced to his side as he entered the cafeteria. It was so quiet that the hum of the refrigerators sounded loud. Only a few tables were occupied, mostly by adults drinking their late-night coffees. The vibe was eerie, like everyone here had accepted insomnia as part of their routine. Still, Izuku reminded himself that this was a hospital, not some haunted mansion, so ghosts were definitely out of the question. One of the sellers behind the counter noticed him and leaned forward with tired eyes. "New here?" they asked, offering a small but genuine smile despite the exhaustion on their face. Izuku nodded and admitted he was, adding that he hoped he wouldn't be stuck here forever. He ordered whatever looked edible, though the options were painfully boring. In the end, he settled for a plain sandwich and a bottled water because there was nothing else. Just as he reached for his tray, another hand set something on it, something warm and much more appetizing than his boring sandwich. Izuku looked up and found Katsuki standing there. The blonde still looked pale from earlier, but at least his breathing seemed normal now. "Wait, sandwich is only my appetite," Izuku said in confusion. "It's for me. Your treat, right?" Katsuki smirked as if nothing life-threatening had happened an hour ago. Izuku blinked at him, shocked at how easily Katsuki could switch back to being a gremlin. Weird guy, he muttered under his breath, watching the blonde walk away. He thought Katsuki would at least help him carry the tray. Instead, Katsuki abandoned him without hesitation and took a seat near the windows, plopping down like he owned the place. Izuku couldn't help but frown, shifting the weight of the tray in his hands. After paying for everything, he was about to follow Katsuki when the sellers spoke to him again. "It's a good thing you came," they said softly while wiping a coffee machine. "It's been a while since I've seen that blonde kid look happy." Izuku froze for a moment, not expecting that. He didn't know what to say, so he simply offered a small smile and waved politely. Then he walked toward Katsuki's table, his mind replaying the seller's words as he went. Izuku glanced up at the wall clock across the cafeteria. Somehow, it was already 3 a.m., and he had barely managed one sad bite of his sandwich. Katsuki, on the other hand, devoured his food like he hadn't eaten in years, crumbs sticking to his hoodie as he tore open another packet. The cafeteria was so quiet that every slurp and crunch Katsuki made echoed like a threat against Izuku's sanity. "There are a lot of people out there starving with no money," Katsuki muttered through a mouthful. "Don't be so spoiled." Izuku shot him a look and gently pushed his untouched plate away. "I don't have an appetite anymore," he said and lifted his water bottle for another sip. Katsuki leaned back in his chair and glared at him. "Then why did you drag your butt here if you weren't hungry?" "I thought the food here would taste good." Izuku poked the sandwich wrapper, defeated. "But I was wrong." Katsuki shrugged, stretching his arms above his head until his back cracked. "Get used to it. Aizawa said he's bringing us fries next week, so try not to die before then." Izuku slumped deeper into his chair. The cool plastic pressed against his back, grounding him a little as he stared at the dim cafeteria lights. A warm memory hit him the way his mom would sneak him out late at night for katsudon from the shop down the street. The smell, the warmth, the comfort. His heart squeezed painfully. Right now, he would give anything to eat katsudon again. "Katsuki, come with me. Please." Katsuki paused mid-bite, brow raised as he slowly placed his spoon back into his bowl. "Where the hell are you going?" Izuku looked away and started zipping up his jacket. "Just come with me." Katsuki stood halfway from his chair, squinting suspiciously. "It's outside, isn't it?" "Izuku, you idiot, Aizawa will skin us alive." Izuku didn't even wait for him to finish complaining. He grabbed Katsuki's wrist and tugged hard enough to make the blonde stumble out of his seat. Katsuki cursed under his breath, nearly dropping his bowl as he followed. "Stop pulling, I can walk, dumps," he hissed. Izuku only tightened his grip and rushed toward the cafeteria doors. His heart pounded with adrenaline as they slipped into the hallway, footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. The night shift nurse had disappeared down the opposite corridor, leaving the entrance unguarded. "Katsuki, faster," Izuku whispered. The blonde clicked his tongue but sped up beside him, matching his pace. Their shoulders bumped as they turned the corner, and Izuku reached for the push bar on the emergency door. He hesitated for half a second, listening for footsteps behind them. Nothing. He pushed the door open, and the cold outside air hit them like a slap. Katsuki shivered but didn't complain this time. "Holy shit, we're actually doing this," Katsuki muttered, stuffing his hands into his pockets. Izuku smiled wide, reckless, and free. "Come on," he whispered, stepping out into the night. Together, they ran out of the hospital. After they hopped out of the taxi, Izuku immediately felt a burst of warmth in his chest. The familiar bright sign greeted him like an old friend plus ultra katsudons, glowing proudly in the dark street. He couldn't stop himself from smiling so big his cheeks hurt. The place was still here, still open, still perfectly the same. Katsuki grimaced as he stared at the storefront. "This is it? This is where you dragged me at 3 in the demon morning?" Plus Ultra Katsudons. Open 24 hours. Serving the best katsudon since 1890. Izuku read dramatically, gesturing to the sign. "Of course this is the place. I love it here, and you're gonna love it too." Before Katsuki could protest, Izuku grabbed his sleeve and pulled him toward the entrance. The bell above the door jingled loudly as they stepped inside, making every single person in the restaurant turn to look at them. Izuku froze for a second. "Oh right, They were still wearing hospital clothes. Katsuki's hoodie was literally stained with dried blood. But Izuku didn't care. This place was home. He missed it too much to be embarrassed now. Katsuki crossed his arms and scanned the place suspiciously. "Deku, are you sure the food here is safe?" he asked louder than necessary, earning a few offended stares from nearby tables. Izuku elbowed him. "Don't be rude. And yes, it's safe. You're just scared to try new things." "I'm not scared," Katsuki snapped, though he looked extremely unconvinced as he eyed the menu board like it might attack him. Izuku leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Trust me, okay? Their curry is amazing. And I think it suits you." Katsuki gave him a confused glare. "Why curry? The name of the restaurant literally says katsudon, dumbass." Izuku rolled his eyes and pushed him toward the counter. "Just shut up and let me order before I lose my mind." Katsuki clicked his tongue but followed, still wiping at the dried blood on his hoodie like it suddenly mattered. Izuku stepped up to the counter first, hands already itching with excitement. Izuku watched Katsuki with an unimpressed expression, leaning back slightly in his chair. Earlier, Katsuki had done nothing but complain about the restaurant, questioning everything from the cleanliness of the tables to whether the food was even safe to eat. He had worried that too much grime would somehow block his poor heart. The key word was now. The blonde devoured the curry with an intensity that made it seem as if he were about to eat the bowl itself. 3 extra servings of rice sat stacked neatly beside him, and Katsuki couldn't help but raise an eyebrow in disbelief. The way Katsuki had been so cautious before, and now watching him shovel curry like this, was almost comical. Katsuki's curiosity was piqued further when he noticed Izuku pulling out a small notebook and scribbling something. "What are you doing?" he asked suspiciously. "Are you a stalker or something? Writing down private information about someone's life secretly?" he added, narrowing his eyes at the boy. Izuku looked up, frowning, before swallowing a mouthful of curry. "No. I'm just journaling this moment," he said defensively. "It's good to keep memories, you know?" Katsuki let out a scoff, but his frown softened slightly, though skepticism still lingered. Izuku shrugged and smiled faintly, remembering a past incident in the same restaurant. "This place has its memories for me," he said quietly. "My wallet was stolen here once, because I fainted while eating." Katsuki blinked for a moment, and then a laugh burst out of him, sharp and loud. "Of course you'd do something like that," he said between chuckles, shaking his head. Even as he laughed, there was a hint of amusement hidden behind the usual gruffness, and for a moment, the tension between them eased. "Katsuki, you just ate 5 bowls. Doesn't your stomach hurt?" Izuku asked, worried, threading his voice as he watched the blonde shovel another spoonful of curry into his mouth. Katsuki just shrugged, unbothered, and gestured to the waiter to bring his 6th bowl. Izuku glanced back at his own empty bowl of katsudon. 1 bowl had been more than enough to satisfy his hunger, but Katsuki, is his stomach a black hole or something? "Tisk," Katsuki said, liking his spoon before digging in again. 6 bowls are pretty numbers. I could order 100 of them and I wouldn't even get sick of it. Izuku raised an eyebrow, a sarcastic smile tugging at his lips. "Are you sure about that?" Katsuki shot him a sharp look, furrowing his eyebrows. "Are you challenging me?" he asked, tone suspicious but tinged with excitement. Izuku shrugged playfully. "Can you really do it?" "Of course I can," Katsuki said confidently, his eyes glinting with determination. "I promise you before I die, I will finish 100 bowls of this curry." Izuku couldn't help but laugh. The sound was full and warm, echoing through the small restaurant. Watching Katsuki so fiercely determined over something as simple as curry was both ridiculous and endearing, and it made Izuku feel that familiar joy of sharing a moment like this with Katsuki. "Katsuki." Izuku gripped the sink as best he could, staring at his reflection while trying to scrub the stubborn ink from his face. It had to be Katsuki. He never missed a chance to pull a prank on Izuku, and he had clearly done it again. One day, Izuku thought he would find a way to get back at him. "Thanks, Izuku." He jumped slightly at the voice behind him. Himiko was leaning casually against the open bathroom door, a calm smile on her face that made him uneasy. She could be unnervingly intense at times. While he liked her fangirl energy, her sudden appearance here gave him the creeps. What? Himiko, don't just sneak up like that, he said, turning toward her and leaning against the sink while wiping at his damp face. You saved all of us from Katsuki's chaos, she said, tilting her head. Since you arrived, things have been peaceful. Izuku hesitated. He wasn't sure if he should take that as a compliment. For the first time, Himiko didn't look like she was ready to attack someone. Maybe her medication was finally helping. Shoto had told him she didn't have any illnesses besides severe depression, something involving polar bears? Though he couldn't quite recall the details. It's easy for you. For me, it's a nightmare. I have to deal with all his antics alone. How nice, he muttered sarcastically. He hated how Katsuki constantly made life difficult, but he had to admit that Himiko kept things interesting. At least he never got bored during his stay. You really don't understand, do you? Himiko asked, frowning yet still smiling faintly. Which part? He replied, frowning. Talking to her always seemed complicated. You've been here for almost 5 months. Maybe you haven't noticed, but we can see the difference in Katsuki, she said. Izuku froze for a moment, realizing how quickly time had passed. He was nearly 5 months into his hospital stay, far longer than he had imagined. He hadn't expected to even make it a month. In these 5 months, I've probably slept more than ever, he said with a sigh, glancing at his reflection again. He looked at Himiko briefly, wondering if she even noticed how much his life had changed or perhaps how much had stayed the same. Himiko's voice broke the quiet of the room. Do you know that whenever you sleep, Katsuki does nothing but hang out in your room, waiting for you to wake up? Izuku's forehead wrinkled in disbelief. And why would he do that? Himiko, that's impossible, he insisted, shaking his head as he walked out of the small bathroom. The idea felt strange, almost surreal. He sat down on his bed and put on a song, letting the gentle music fill the room. Looking around, he realized it was already afternoon. Have you ever experienced loving someone? Himiko asked, sliding onto the bed beside him, her gaze fixed somewhere distant. Izuku's mind raced. This woman wasn't psychotic, right? He should probably research her illness to better understand her actions. Of course, he said quickly. My mom once bought me a bird as a pet. I loved it so much, but it's gone now, gone to heaven. He sighed, leaning back against the headboard, when he noticed Himiko glaring at him from a distance or maybe just in his imagination. The intensity in that stare was enough to make him flinch. This girl must be possessed by a demon, he thought in shock. Person Izuku. A person, Himiko murmured without emotion, her words making him pause. Hitoshi Shinso. I love that guy. How's he doing now? Ugh, I must have forgotten to check if he has a new song from My Hero University, Izuku rambled, distractedly. Izuku's heart sank a little as Himiko's tone softened. Itasikis, right? Itasis not to have a normal life, she said, her voice heavy with what seemed like real sadness. Yes, Itasis, he admitted, his own voice quiet. Itasikis not to have a normal life. Itasikis not to have friends. Itasikis because I've never been to a normal school. Itasikis because I can't do most of the things I want to do. Love stories, adventures, vacations, all the things everyone else experiences. I only see them on TV and in movies. How would it feel to have a normal life? Himiko asked, and for a moment, Izuku could feel the weight of her question pressing down on him. Sheet. That's enough. I don't want it anymore. The sudden scream rang out from outside, loud and sharp. Izuku's stomach lurched. It sounded like Katsuki. He looked at Himiko, expecting concern, but she simply stared at the floor, a sad expression on her face, as if the noise didn't matter to her at all. Izuku rose, about to rush to Katsuki's room, when Himiko grabbed his hand. Just pretend you didn't hear it, she said firmly. What? What if Katsuki really needs help? You heard that, right? Izuku exclaimed. You've only been here 5 months, Himiko said, her voice calm but steady. You're probably asleep on days like this, so you haven't heard it yet. But I've been here for almost 3 years. I'm used to hearing his screams during troponin checkups. Izuku nodded slowly, processing her words. He wasn't an expert, but after being moved between hospitals so many times, he understood what that meant. He had always known Katsuki was sick, but he had never realized the extent. He had been fooled by Katsuki's constant smiles and laughter. Now, he finally understood why Katsuki always tried to hide his pain. Izuku shook Himiko's hand and hurriedly walked out of the room. He was caught off guard when Shoto suddenly blocked his path with his wheelchair. Instinctively, he backed up, nearly stubbing his toe in the process, which made him wince in pain. "Don't go to him. He'll just get angry," Shoto said, his voice heavy with a kind of sadness Izuku had only seen once before. Izuku ignored him and pressed forward anyway, moving past Shoto without effort. His steps slowed as he reached the slightly open door of Katsuki's room. Even through the small gap, he could still hear the screams, and his heart began to race with nervousness. There was a raw, intense pain in Katsuki's voice that made Izuku feel as though he were being hurt himself. Hesitating, Izuku carefully peeked inside and immediately covered his mouth. His chest tightened at the sight before him. Katsuki lay on his side, writhing in agony on the bed. His face was contorted with pain, fists clenched tightly, and though his eyes were closed, tears streamed down his cheeks. Several nurses and a few doctors were around him, administering some sort of injection into his back. The procedure seemed to cause immense pain, and Katsuki had no one there to comfort him, no family, no Aizawa, no one to remind him he wasn't alone. He faced this suffering entirely by himself. Izuku's mind raced. Katsuki had been battling his illness for nearly 12 years, fighting for his life since he was a child. Turning slightly, he saw Shoto watching from a distance, his expression heavy with the weight of knowing Katsuki's struggles. What's his illness?" Izuku asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pulmonary embolism. A type of blood clot he's suffered from since he was a kid. Katsuki is incredibly strong. The doctors once gave him a deadline. They said he wouldn't live to 10. And yet, here he is, still fighting," Shoto explained, his tone grave. Izuku stared at Katsuki again, his chest aching. Why did his heart feel like it was breaking just watching him? Why did it hurt as much as if it were his own pain? Where were his family? Why is he alone in this moment of suffering? He turned back to Shoto, eyes wide and brimming with tears. "Izuku," Shoto began, reminding Izuku that he's becoming too emotional again. Izuku's hand instinctively went to his own face, wiping away the tears he hadn't realized were falling. He understood now that Katsuki hadn't wanted his parents or Aizawa to see him like this. He had tried to shield everyone from the raw pain he endured. Himiko, who had followed silently, placed a reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. "He doesn't want you to see him like this," she said softly, her eyes on Katsuki. Izuku's chest tightened further, but he didn't look away. He knew, even in this moment, that Katsuki's strength wasn't just in his body, it was in his will to endure, to protect those he cared about, even while he suffered alone. Izuku turned his attention back to Katsuki, who still hadn't noticed they were there. He felt a deep admiration rise in him. Katsuki always managed to laugh, always managed to act strong, as if nothing in the world could break him. If Izuku hadn't witnessed this moment, he would have believed Katsuki had no problems at all. He used to think he was the only sad one in this place, but now he understood. Everyone in this ward carried their own pain. Everyone felt alone. Maybe that was why they were all put here together. Maybe this ward existed so none of them would have to face their suffering by themselves. Izuku didn't even realize he had stepped inside the room until he felt the shift in air. The nurses and doctors glanced at him, but he ignored their startled looks and quietly sat near the foot of Katsuki's trembling form. It took a moment, but Katsuki finally sensed him. His swollen, tear-stained eyes cracked open. "Get out! Get out of here!" Even though his body was weak and shaking, he still yelled, still glared, still held onto that fierce pride. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached forward and held Katsuki's trembling hand, gripping it tightly. "Izuku! Yubisu! Get out! I don't need you!" Katsuki shouted again, voice breaking as he writhed in pain. Izuku only smiled at him, sadly, softly and met his eyes. "Just scream," he said gently. "They say it helps with the pain." No matter how many insults Katsuki threw at him, Izuku refused to move. And strangely, neither the doctors nor the nurses tried to stop him. In fact, they almost looked relieved he was there. "Izuku," Katsuki's voice was weakening. His lips trembled uncontrollably, his breath coming in broken gasps. Izuku tightened his hold on his hand, anchoring him. "From now on," Izuku said shakily, trying to smile through his own tears, "I'm calling you Kaken, because you really look like one right now." The joke came out uneven, half-choked, but he forced himself to keep smiling. He needed Katsuki to hear him, to feel him. "You can do this," Izuku whispered. "You're Kaken. You'll beat this. You'll get through this illness, you always do." He kept saying it, over and over, as if repeating it could pull Katsuki through the pain. And even though his own tears kept falling, Izuku didn't let go. Not even for a second. Katsuki took a deep breath and slowly nodded. Izuku felt him grasp his hand in return, weak but deliberate. Despite still writhing in pain, Katsuki managed to offer him a small, shaky smile. At that moment, Izuku felt like he was seeing the real Katsuki Bakugo for the first time. Up until now, he had only known the loud, fiery, troublemaking boy who tripped everyone up and acted as if nothing could touch him. But this was different. The boy before him was someone who had endured unimaginable pain and hardships, yet still faced it with courage, still managed to smile through it all. He was brave in a way Izuku had never fully appreciated until now. Katsuki was special not in a way that made him fragile or unstable, but in the rare, extraordinary way someone could be genuinely remarkable. Izuku's heart ached with admiration. He had never met anyone like him. Izuku watched Katsuki sleep after the treatment, the faint rise and fall of his chest somehow calming yet painful to witness. The boy looked so small, so fragile lying there, and Izuku couldn't help but wonder aloud, will he be okay? "He will be," Shoto replied firmly, though there was a softness to his tone that Izuku had only heard once before. "He's Katsuki Bakugo. He always pulls through." Izuku let out a small sigh, feeling a mix of relief and lingering worry. His attention was drawn away when Himiko suddenly spoke. "If you like each other, then just go date each other already." Izuku whipped his head toward her, frowning. "What?" Himiko only smiled innocently, as if she had said nothing out of the ordinary. "I don't like him," Izuku insisted, swatting her hand lightly. He didn't care if Katsuki could explode in rage at the statement later, he just needed to make it clear. Shoto, standing nearby. "If you don't like him, why do you seem so concerned about him?" Izuku scowled. "Even Shoto?" He muttered under his breath, "I'm a caring person. If it were you, I'd do the same," before walking out of the room, trying to ignore their teasing. Back in his room, Izuku attempted to distract himself from the constant worry gnawing at him. He turned on the TV. He lied down on his bed. He picked at some snacks, checked the internet, scrolled, and watched more TV. Ate again. Turned the sound off to listen to some music. Wrote in his notebook. "I don't know what else to do in this place," he muttered aloud. "It's driving me crazy. I want to sleep, but I'll probably wake up in another decade if I do." A soft knock at the door startled him. "Izuku," came Aizawa's voice. Immediately, Izuku adjusted his posture. "Hello." Aizawa stepped inside and placed a pizza box on the small table. He had always been thoughtful, even with all the chaos of the ward. "Shoto told me what happened earlier," Aizawa said. "Thank you for not giving up on my problem child." Izuku smiled faintly. It was funny to think about it like that. Aizawa treated Katsuki like a son, but somehow, he treated all of them like they were his children. There was a quiet strength and care in his demeanor that was impressive. "How is he? Is he awake yet?" Izuku asked, his worry resurfacing. "He is awake, but he refuses to eat," Aizawa replied. "Can you talk to him? It seems you're the only one he'll listen to right now." Izuku frowned. He swallowed the nervousness lumping his throat. "I'll try," he said, slipping into his slippers and heading for Katsuki's room. Before leaving, he hesitated for a moment. Aizawa, can I just follow him later? Just stay nearby. Aizawa nodded and left silently, giving him the time he needed. Minutes later, a guard intercepted him at the doorway. This is a DLVY for Izukumido. Izuku didn't even let the guard finish and snatched the 2 bags of food, rushing upstairs. Aizawa had been stepping out of Katsuki's room just as he arrived. Oh, Izuku, you're here. I'll leave you 2 alone, Aizawa said, turning to leave. Izuku smiled as he set the bags on the table. Katsuki's room was fully stocked, thankfully, so it was easy to grab bowls, spoons, and plates. Katsuki's gaze was flat as he lay on the bed, staring at the tray of food in front of him. What are you doing here? He asked without emotion. Izuku observed the tray, noting how untouched it was. Do you want to eat? He asked, hands on his hips. Katsuki turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. Izuku wondered if the blonde is mad at him, feeling a pang of guilt. Katsuki, seriously, do you want to eat or not? Katsuki shook his head, but Izuku gently removed the tray and set it aside. Okay then. I guess I'll just leave with this curry, he said dramatically, shaking the bag for effect. Wait, curry? Katsuki stuttered. Please. Izuku grinned, realizing that this stubborn boy could be bribed with food. Katsuki, take it easy, you'll choke if you eat too fast, Izuku warned. Katsuki ignored him, diving back into the bowls. Izuku had only one, his very own katsudon, while Katsuki was already on his 4th. If he ate 9 bowls last week and 4 now, 13 bowls. Izuku thought, half amused, half exasperated. 13 bowls? That's impressive, he muttered under his breath. 87 more, Katsuki said around a mouthful of bulalo. I have to catch up. Kaken, no one is chasing you, Izuku reminded him gently. Katsuki swallowed, wiped his lips, and looked at Izuku with a weak smirk. There's... Izuku. It's hard, maybe my pickup has already arrived. I can't keep my promise, he murmured. Izuku froze, the words slicing through him like a blade. He slowly set down the cutlery, feeling the warmth leave his hands. His appetite vanished. He hates this. He hates it when someone talks about death like that. Who says you're dying? Izuku asked, his voice trembling as he tried to hold back tears. Katsuki offered a small, almost shy smile. I've heard it too many times since I've been here. I'm used to it, he said softly, meeting Izuku's eyes. Even in the faint light of the room, the vulnerability, the exhaustion, the bravery in Katsuki's expression hit Izuku like a tidal wave. And in that moment, he realized that for all Katsuki's anger, pride, and bluster, there was a quiet strength, a willingness to endure pain alone to protect others. Izuku's chest ached as he looked at him, powerless but determined to stay. He would not leave Katsuki alone, not now, not ever. You're not dying, Izuku said, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay steady. No one's dying. No one's going to die. Katsuki let out a humorless laugh. We'll all die eventually. Maybe I'll just be the first. Izuku's chest tightened, tears welling up. He hastily wiped them away, forcing a shaky smile even though it made him look ridiculous. Suddenly, Katsuki leaned forward and swiped his jacket across Izuku's face. Was he trying to wipe Izuku's tears? Or just his jacket? Izuku wasn't sure, but his heart tightened at the gesture. Wait, don't cry. Katsuki snapped. I'm not going to die, okay? You know Himiko and Shoto will be the first ones to go. Sheet. Both of them shouted at the same time when a gasp sounded out behind them, only to freeze when they realized the door had been open the entire time. Himiko and Shoto stood in the doorway, eyes wide, listening to every word. The next morning, Izuku found himself alone on the rooftop. He yawned, glancing at his watch. It was already 7, yet the air was still cold, the wind tugging gently at his hair. He had taken a risk coming here alone, climbing the stairs to escape the noise of the ward. Sitting on the floor and leaning against the wall, he felt a small measure of comfort, a space just for himself. He pulled his journal from his bag and flipped to a blank page. He hadn't slept since the previous day. That might have been fine under normal circumstances, But right now it made him restless and bored. He missed Katsuki. That guy's mischievous energy always seemed to fill the ward, and today it felt empty without it. He also couldn't hang out with Himiko or Shoto. Their parents were visiting, leaving him alone. Being here on the rooftop kept him away from the jealousy that would have bubbled up if he saw them with their families. He bent over his journal, pen scratching across the page as he wrote. Words of thoughts, observations, and everything his mind churned through spilled onto the paper. For a moment, the outside world felt distant. Are you deaf or just too focused on your journaling? A voice asked, breaking through his concentration. Startled, Izuku looked up. Katsuki appeared at his side, smirking like nothing in the world could touch him. It was such a stark contrast to the boy Izuku had seen yesterday, curled up in pain. He tried to focus back on his journal. Not now, Kaken. I'm busy, Izuku muttered, his eyes fixed on the words he was writing. Katsuki ignored him and sat down anyway. He leaned closer, nudging Izuku gently. Izuku tried to concentrate, but his gaze kept drifting to Katsuki, who looked impossibly relaxed. Before Izuku could react, Katsuki laid his head on Izuku's lap. The sudden weight made him gasp. The journal slipped from his hands and landed squarely on Katsuki's face. "Oh, why did you do that?" Katsuki yelped, grabbing his nose and pushing the journal away. "I'm sorry. You startled me. I didn't mean to." Izuku stammered. The thick journal cover had hit him harder than he anticipated. Katsuki's stubbornness showed as he kept his hand over his face, refusing to let Izuku check for injuries. "Katsuki, let me see." Izuku insisted, leaning closer. "I just want to make sure you're okay." Katsuki ignored him, holding his position firmly. Izuku sighed, realizing he wasn't going to win this battle. He straightened back against the wall, gently speaking through gritted teeth. "Your head is heavy. Stand up." He tried to focus on his journaling again, but the distraction was almost impossible. Every time his pen moved, Katsuki nudged it, pushed it, or poked at the page, making him drop the notebook again, this time, entirely on purpose. The journal hit Katsuki squarely in the face once more. Izuku's lips pressed together in a frustrated smile. Despite everything, Katsuki seemed determined to use him as a pillow, and Izuku had no choice but to accept it. "Deku, it fucking hurts when a notebook falls on you," Katsuki exclaimed, rubbing the spot where the journal had smacked him. He looked almost childlike, his frustration making him seem like a stubborn little kid throwing a tantrum. Izuku raised an eyebrow at him. "Get up now. What did you think I was, a pillow?" That finally worked. Slowly, Katsuki got to his feet and settled beside Izuku. Victory surged in Izuku's chest. He leaned back against the wall, letting out a relieved sigh. Their eyes met briefly, and Izuku immediately looked away, pretending to focus on his writing. He had no idea why it annoyed him that Katsuki might think he liked him. He didn't. Not at all. "Why are you here?" "It's cold," Katsuki muttered suddenly, draping his jacket over Izuku's head in a half-hearted attempt at care. Not exactly a gentleman. Izuku frowned, hiding his slight smile. Changing the subject, he asked, "How's your checkup?" He didn't want to talk about his jealousy toward Shoto and Himiko. Thinking about their parents visiting only made him feel lonelier. "The doctor said this is the best condition I've been in since I was diagnosed," Katsuki replied, and Izuku couldn't help but close his journal. He smiled softly, taking in the sight of Katsuki staring up at the cloudy sky. The joy on his face was quiet but unmistakable. Without thinking, Izuku grabbed the small camera lying beside him and snapped a picture of Katsuki. The boy's eyes widened in surprise. "Stalker," he said softly, shaking his head but smiling in a way that was almost silly. "Photographer Kaken," Izuku said with a grin, handing him the photo. "Animal photographer." Katsuki took the photo and looked at it, then laughed. "Since you're almost cured, I'll just accept this as a gift. Remembrance, I guess." Izuku laughed, returning the gesture. "Healed? That's the funniest joke I've heard all week," Katsuki said, suddenly snatching the camera from Izuku's hands. Before Izuku could react, Katsuki draped an arm around him and started taking photos of the two of them together. Izuku smiled instinctively and made a peace sign just like him. Katsuki, you'll get better too, Izuku said softly. With your courage and determination, there's a really good chance you'll have a normal life. What if it doesn't happen? Katsuki asked, still smiling as he clicked the shutter. What if it really does? Izuku replied. Impossible, Katsuki shrugged, continuing to take photos. Izuku reached out, his tone more serious this time. But Katsuki, listen. Do you want to get better? Do you want to have a normal life? Katsuki paused, the camera lowering slightly. He stared into the distance, the sky reflecting in his eyes. He let out a soft sigh, then smiled faintly. I pray every day that I can have a normal life, he admitted quietly. Without thinking, he laid his head back on Izuku's lap again, facing the sky, his back to him. Izuku's heart ached with a mixture of admiration and hope. You're the bravest and strongest person I've ever met, Izuku whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Katsuki's forehead. You will have a normal life, Katsuki. I can feel it. You just have to believe in yourself. Do you really believe I'll get better? Katsuki asked, his voice calm but heavy, emotion almost unreadable. His head rested on Izuku's lap, and for a moment, Izuku couldn't see the expression on his face. Just have faith, Katsuki, Izuku said softly, his hand brushing through Katsuki's hair. Never let your faith wither. You can do this. Katsuki lifted his head slightly, his gray eyes meeting Izuku's. Stay with me until I get better. Is that possible? Izuku couldn't help but smile at the raw vulnerability in those words. He nodded firmly. As long as I'm awake, I promise. Stay awake. Katsuki's voice was almost a whisper, yet there was determination behind it. He turned slightly so that he was facing Izuku, still lying across his lap. Izuku bent down a little so that their eyes locked. The gray eyes staring back at him were so intense, so unguarded, that his chest tightened. I'll try, he admitted, his voice soft. But to be honest, I have this habit of disappointing people, Kaken. Katsuki's lips curved into a faint smile. Just stay awake. Stay awake, Izuku, he said again, repeating the words with a quiet insistence that made Izuku's heart ache. Izuku let himself stare into those gray eyes for a long moment, feeling the weight of Katsuki's trust and determination. Despite the teasing, the stubbornness, the harsh words, there was something undeniable in this small exchange, a bond of courage and hope that neither of them could put into words. He nodded once more, gripping Katsuki's hand gently. I'll stay awake, he promised, and for the first time that morning, there was a quiet peace between them, a fragile understanding that they would face this together. Katsuki's smile widened just slightly, enough to show relief. Good, he murmured again, his voice lighter this time, as if repeating it aloud could make it real. Izuku just nodded, letting the wind brush over them, the world around them fading away. He leaned back against the wall, mirroring Katsuki's gaze toward the cloudy morning sky, letting the wind brush past them. In that moment, sitting side by side on the rooftop, Izuku felt a quiet reassurance. Katsuki's determination was palpable, and he knew somehow that the boy in front of him would keep fighting, no matter what. The hospital lights were harsh and cold, reflecting off the stainless steel tray beside the doctor. Katsuki sat stiffly on the examination bed, jaw clenched as he tried not to show how terrified he truly was. The doctor held up the syringe and asked gently, Katsuki, are you ready? Katsuki's fingers twitched. His breathing grew shallow. Deku, he whispered, barely audible, but Izuku heard him instantly. Izuku moved closer without hesitation. He took Katsuki's trembling hand in his own, warm and steady, and squeezed gently. I'm right here, he whispered, giving Katsuki a soft smile. The kind that always seemed to calm him down. The procedure began. A pulmonary angiogram wasn't supposed to be easy, and Izuku knew that, but nothing prepared him for the way Katsuki winced the moment the catheter entered his arm. Katsuki groaned through clenched teeth, his body tightening as the pain surged. Izuku's heart dropped at the sound. He squeezed Katsuki's hand tighter. Just breathe with me, Izuku whispered, even though his own breathing was uneven. Katsuki's grip on him was desperate, even painful, But Izuku didn't let go. He closed his eyes. I won't leave you behind. Not ever. As long as Katsuki needed him, he'd stay awake. He'd stay present. He'd stay. Months passed, and that promise became their routine. Every blood draw, every CT angiography, every angiogram, it didn't matter how painful or terrifying it was. Izuku was always there, sitting beside him, holding his hand before Katsuki even asked. Sometimes Izuku fainted mid-visit, slumping against Katsuki's shoulder during a painful injection, and the nurses had to catch him before he fell. Katsuki would always grumble, "Stupid Deku," but his hands never let go of Izuku's. And Izuku stayed awake as best he could, even when his eyelids felt like bricks. He stayed because Katsuki wasn't alone anymore, and neither was he. Their closeness didn't go unnoticed. Even Aizawa raised an eyebrow the day Katsuki refused to let any other nurse accompany him except Izuku. Himiko teased them endlessly. Shoto shrugged and said, "They're trauma bonding," which earned him a slipper thrown to the face. But no matter how much they argued or teased, the bond between them only grew stronger. One afternoon, the ward was unusually lively. Shoto sat in his wheelchair, spinning lazily while Katsuki and Himiko bickered over snacks. Izuku sat on the edge of the bed watching them with a soft smile. "Let's play charades," Shoto said as he parked his wheelchair in the center of the room. "No!" Himiko yelped immediately. "You're gonna run over my foot again." "That was one time," Shoto deadpanned. Katsuki snorted. "Let's just play chasing game using our own feet." Izuku burst into laughter, and Himiko practically fell off her chair giggling. Shoto stared at Katsuki for a long moment before raising his hand and flipping him off without emotion. "That's the spirit." Katsuki barked, smirking as he tossed popcorn into his mouth. Izuku groaned loudly and slumped back on Shoto's bed. "Are you kidding me? Why can't we go out today?" His frustration echoed around the room, and he dramatically pulled a pillow over his face. Himiko stretched her legs on the floor and twirled a strand of her messy hair. "We literally told you this morning," she said. "It's disinfection day. They clean all our rooms and hallways. No one's allowed out unless it's an emergency." Izuku peeked from under the pillow, realizing she was right. He had forgotten. Before he could defend himself, Katsuki smirked and slid closer to him on the bed. "Well, you're always asleep, Dus. No wonder you forget everything." Then Katsuki casually leaned his head on Izuku's shoulder. Izuku froze. The weight was heavy, warm, and annoyingly comfortable. "Get your massive head off me," he hissed, trying to shove him away. "No," Katsuki mumbled, settling even heavier. Izuku swore his collarbone was going to snap. A knock sounded on the door. Izuku jolted so hard the pillow fell to the floor. Aizawa stepped in with a clipboard under his arm, looking more tired than usual. The moment he saw them, Katsuki leaning on Izuku stiff as a board, Aizawa's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. Izuku panicked and elbowed Katsuki off him so fast the blonde nearly slipped off the bed. Shoto raised a brow. "Honestly? I wouldn't be surprised if you two ended up together." Izuku shot him a lethal glare, cheeks heating up. Shoto. "No." Katsuki stretched lazily like that elbow didn't almost knock his ribs out. "Me? With this nerd," he said, snickering. Then he shrugged. "Maybe." Izuku's soul left his body for a second. "What do you mean maybe?" he yelled, face red as a tomato. Himiko burst into laughter so loud she fell sideways on the floor. Shoto looked smug. Aizawa sighed into his clipboard. "And Katsuki?" Katsuki wore the smuggest smirk on earth. He loved teasing Izuku. Even when he knew Izuku was annoyed. Especially when Izuku was annoyed. Aizawa cleared his throat, cutting Katsuki's teasing short. "Bakugutaf. Midoriya, your doctor called for you." Izuku blinked in confusion. "What? Already? But I just had a checkup last week." He sat up straight, nerves creeping into his voice. His checkups were supposed to be once a month. A sudden call wasn't a good sign, and everyone in the room knew it. When Izuku stood, Katsuki stood up at the exact same time, moving so naturally it looked like he'd been glued to Izuku from the start. Himiko tilted her head and smirked at the sight. Ah, look at that. Their livers are so close they're practically a matching set. You can't separate them in the hallways. Katsuki scoffed, but he didn't deny. Aizawa raised his hand. Not this time. Bakugu, sit down. Only Izuku was called. Katsuki froze mid-step, caught like a dog being told to stay. The look on his face was half offended, half ready to bite someone. Shoto rolled his wheelchair forward just a little and smirked. No pets allowed. Katsuki glared daggers at him. Say that again, half and half, I dare you. Shoto calmly looked away, smug as ever. Izuku walked toward the door, trying to hide how nervous he felt. Before he could step out, Katsuki suddenly grabbed his wrist, not hard, just enough to stop him. Oi, Katsuki muttered, looking away like he hated needing to say this. Do me a favor. Izuku turned to him, surprised by the change in tone. What is it? Katsuki scratched his cheek, avoiding eye contact. My blood test is later. Be there with me. Izuku didn't even hesitate. Of course, he said, smiling softly. Katsuki grunted, pretending he didn't care, but his shoulders eased a little. Izuku gave his hand one last squeeze before following Aizawa out of the room, leaving the others behind. The moment the door closed, Himiko whispered loudly, You're totally in love. Katsuki threw a pillow at her. Izuku sat outside the doctor's office, rubbing his palms together as anxiety crawled up his spine. The hallway felt colder than usual, and the plastic chair beneath him seemed too stiff. Izao, is there a problem? He whispered, voice trembling. Why didn't Katsuki come with me today? He always comes. Aizawa rested a hand on his shoulder. If you want, I can call your parents, he offered quietly. Izuku shook his head quickly. No, thank you. I can handle it. Before Aizawa could say anything else, Dr. Chio opened the door and motioned for Izuku to enter. Izuku stepped inside, already feeling the dread settle in his stomach. Usually, Dr. Chio greeted him with a warm smile, but today there was none, only a tired, unreadable expression. Izuku swallowed. Why did you call me in? I just had my checkup last week. Dr. Chio looked at him steadily. Izuku, your monthly checkup was yesterday. Not last week. Izuku stiffened, a cold wave rushing through him. He blinked rapidly, trying to remember, trying to force the memory to appear, but nothing came. Oh, sorry. I must have forgotten. He tried to laugh it off, tried to smile, but Dr. Chio didn't smile back. When did you start becoming more forgetful? Dr. Chio asked, her tone flat and emotionless, like she was afraid of upsetting him. Izuku twisted his fingers together. Last month? I think. But I've always been forgetful since I was a kid, so I thought it was normal. He attempted a small smile again even though his throat felt tight. Dr. Chio folded her hands. Izuku, how old are you? I'm 16, Izuku answered automatically. Dr. Chio shook her head. You turned 17 2 months ago. You had a birthday party here with Katsuki, Shoto, and Himiko. You don't remember? Izuku's smile vanished completely. His heart dropped so hard he felt dizzy. He remembered pieces of something, blurred lights, laughter, a cake? But it was like looking through fogged glass. Nothing was clear. Nothing was solid. His chest tightened painfully. Am I dying? He asked suddenly, voice cracking. Am I dying? Dr. Chio leaned forward. No. You're not dying. But then she sighed. What? Having trouble managing your condition. Your long QT syndrome isn't typical. You sleep for unusually long PRDS, far longer than normal LQTS. Izuku's breathing sped up. His hands trembled as he wiped his eyes. Don't call my mom, he whispered harshly. I'm old enough to hear bad news. I don't want them to worry about me more than they already do. Midoriya. What's happening to me? Izuku choked out. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he grabbed the hem of his hospital gown. I feel like a burden. I feel like I'm losing myself. My memories, my body, everything. Just tell me. Is my condition getting worse? Dr. Chio hesitated for a moment before finally answering. Yes. Izuku felt everything inside him crumble. That single word shattered whatever hope he had been clinging to. He had expected something, anything better. But not this. What will happen to me now? He asked in a small voice. Dr. Chio studied him quietly. Are you stressed about anything? Anyone? You seem more troubled lately. Izuku didn't even need to think. Katsuki came to his mind immediately. Izuku wiped his face with his sleeve, trying to steady his breathing. I'm not stressed about Katsuki, he said quickly. I'm just worried. Deep down, though, he knew the truth. He wasn't worried for himself. He was terrified of falling asleep again and leaving Katsuki alone. Terrified that one day he'd close his eyes and never open them to see him again. Dr. Chio nodded slowly. Izuku, stress is worsening your condition. Anything that disturbs your emotional stability is dangerous. Izuku understood exactly what the doctor meant. Avoid Katsuki. Avoid the one person he couldn't bear to be apart from. That's impossible, Izuku whispered. I can't do that. He sat there for a moment before forcing himself to ask the question he dreaded most. What's the worst that can happen to me? Dr. Chio didn't soften her voice. You'll sleep. Izuku swallowed. And when will I wake up? There was a long, heavy silence. You might not wake up again. Izuku felt his chest tighten sharply as if the air had been pulled from the room. Tears streamed down his face, but he wasn't even aware of crying until he felt his chin tremble. Is there any way to prolong my life? Dr. Chio leaned back in her chair and exhaled. Avoid stress. That's the safest way. Then she reached for a drawer and set 3 small bottles on the table. There is another option. These are experimental brain stimulants. They're meant to help patients like you stay awake longer. But there is no guarantee they'll work, and the side effects are unknown. Izuku stared at the bottles. So, basically, I'd be a guinea pig, he said quietly. Will I recover if I take them? I can't promise anything, Dr. Chio replied. Think about it carefully. And talk to your mother first. Izuku nodded, though he wasn't sure how he'd even begin that conversation. After thanking the doctor weakly, he stepped out of the office. The hallway felt colder than before. Every step he took echoed faintly, almost hollow. His tears fell freely now, he didn't bother to wipe them. His breathing hitched, chest aching as he walked. His vision started to blur and the lights above him seemed too bright. His eyelids grew heavier with each step, and the floor felt like it was swaying beneath his feet. Izuku woke to the sound of a steady beeping beside him. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the bright ceiling lights above. Something heavy pressed against his nose and mouth, and he reached up to find a plastic oxygen mask strapped over his face. A sting in his hand made him look down at the 4-needle taped into his skin, delivering fluids straight into his veins. Panic hit him all at once. He tore the dextrose out, ignoring the sharp burst of pain. Blood trickled from the small wound, and his hand went numb, but he didn't care. He pushed himself upright, chest heaving as he looked around the room. That's when he saw him. Katsuki lay curled on the sofa a few feet away. His hoodie was drenched in sweat. His breaths were shallow and uneven, barely rising in his chest. His hands trembled against his stomach as though he was trying to hold the pain inside, and his skin had gone frighteningly pale. The sight made Izuku's heart drop. Kaken? Izuku whispered. He stumbled off the bed, legs wobbling. He needed to get help. But the moment Izuku reached the door, a weak hand tugged the back of his hospital gown. Katsuki's fingers shook violently as he held on, but he didn't let go. Katsuki forced his eyes open, pupils dull from exhaustion. Yet somehow, he still managed a tiny smile. You're awake? His voice cracked into a whisper. It's good that you're awake. Izuku froze as the meaning sank into him. How long? He asked, throat tightening. 8 days, Katsuki answered. You were asleep for 8 days. Izuku's knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor beside the bed. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the blonde. Kaken, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Katsuki reached out and wiped his tears with the back of his shaking hand. Why aren't you used to me yet? He whispered. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. Izuku squeezed his hand tightly, trying to stop the shaking with his warmth. Katsuki slowly shifted from the sofa and crawled into the hospital bed beside him, leaning against Izuku even though it clearly took all his strength. "Did you take your medicine?" Izuku asked. Katsuki shook his head slightly. "You're awake," he murmured. "I'm okay now." Izuku frowned through his tears. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay awake." Katsuki leaned his forehead against Izuku's shoulder. "You can sleep, you idiot. Just don't leave me." Izuku nodded because he felt the same. The idea of being separated from Katsuki made his chest ache. After a moment, Katsuki cracked a small grin. "Still pretty though. Even when you cry." Izuku sniffed and pushed his shoulder lightly. "You're ridiculous." But he smiled anyway, even through the tears. "Katsuki," he whispered. "Will you get better?" "Yes," Katsuki answered without hesitation. "You said I would. So I will." His voice shook, but the hope in his eyes was real. He believed Izuku. He always believed him. Izuku stared at him, heart swelling with something warm and painful all at once. Katsuki wasn't just someone he cared about. Katsuki was someone who filled his fading memories with color. Someone who held him together every time he fell apart. Someone special. And Izuku finally understood what he needed to do. He thought of the bottles in Dr. Chiyo's office. He thought of the warning. There's the unknown side effects. Then he looked at Katsuki's trembling body, leaning against him as if Izuku was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. Izuku held his hand firmly and whispered his promise. "I'll stay awake until you get better." He felt his chest steady as he spoke. "I'll do everything I can. I'll stay awake for you." Katsuki's breath caught, and his fingers tightened around Izuku's. For the first time in weeks, Izuku felt certain of something. He wasn't choosing fear. He was choosing Katsuki. Izuku perked up when he heard a familiar voice outside his room. His mom walked in, carrying a large paper bag that smelled like warm food. The moment she saw him awake, she practically rushed over and cupped his face gently. "Baby, are you okay? Does anything hurt? Are you eating properly?" Izuku forced a smile and shrugged. "I'm happy here. I have friends now." He said it with exaggerated sarcasm, but the smile on his mom's face grew soft and relieved, as if those words were the best thing she'd heard in months. "Oh, friends?" she teased, nudging his side as she took a seat beside his bed. "Should I expect you to have a loved one here too?" Izuku rolled his eyes and looked away. "No one would like me, ma. I sleep all the time. I faint whenever I feel like it. Who'd want someone like that?" His mom's smile faltered a little, but she stayed quiet. Izuku stared at his hands and breathed in shakily. The words fell out before he could stop them. "I accept that one day, I might not wake up." His mom froze. Her breath hitched. And then she cried, quiet at first, then trembling, holding her chest like the words physically hurt her. Izuku immediately panicked and reached out to her. "Mom, I didn't mean, he didn't know how to fix it." Every time he opened his mouth, he felt like he only made her suffer more. She wiped her tears roughly and tried to smile through it, but her voice cracked when she spoke. "Izuku, do you know why I brought you here?" Izuku swallowed. Because you were trying to distance yourself from me. So when I die, it won't be too hard." His mom shot up from her chair, eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. "Izuku Midoriya, no." Her voice trembled, equal parts anger and heartbreak. "That's not true. Not even close." Izuku blinked as she grabbed his hands tightly. "I love you," she said, voice breaking. "I love you so much it terrifies me. You're not here because we want distance. You're here because I wanted a chance. I wanted someone to find a cure. I wanted hope. I would never leave you just to prepare myself for your death." She collapsed into a hug, arms tight around him like she feared he would disappear. Izuku hugged her back, guilt burning in his chest. She didn't deserve the pain he caused. She didn't deserve to cry over him as if she was losing something precious. When she finally loosened her hold, Izuku rested his forehead against her shoulder. Even though he felt like a burden, even though he felt like he was slowly fading, he knew one thing for sure. It wouldn't happen anymore. He had found a way. The experimental pills, his chance to stay awake, to keep his memories, to stay with Katsuki, and everyone he loved would give him a fighting chance. Izuku woke up feeling unusually heavy-eyed. Before he could fully regain focus, he heard a voice right beside him. Katsuki leaned over the bed with a smug grin and said, "If you don't wake up, I swear I'm gonna kiss you like Sleeping Beauty." Izuku jolted upright and reacted on instinct, kicking Katsuki straight off the bed. Katsuki hit the floor with a grunt. "What the hell, nerd?" Katsuki grabbed Izuku's wrist as payback, but Izuku tried to pull away. The sudden push and pull made both of them lose balance, and they tumbled off the bed together. Izuku landed flat on Katsuki's chest. The impact hurt, but they were both laughing anyway, breathless and ridiculous. "You crazy Kaken," Izuku said between laughs. "You sleepy Deku," Katsuki shot back, only to cough harshly a moment later. The cough reminded Izuku that Katsuki was still sick, which instantly softened his expression. But Katsuki, being Katsuki, didn't stay serious for long. "Cockroach," Katsuki whispered sharply near Izuku's head. Izuku shrieked and rolled away in terror. When he opened his eyes, he found Katsuki's face barely inches from his own. They both froze, eyes wide. That was the exact moment Shoto and Himiko walked in. Shoto saw them and immediately wheeled himself backward with speed that should have been illegal. Katsuki jumped up and bolted after him, yelling threats while Shoto quietly wheeled himself faster down the hallway. Himiko watched them disappear, then turned to Izuku with a slow smirk. "You were falling on him," she teased. Izuku groaned. "We literally fell." "Figuratively too," she hummed. Izuku tried to ignore her and handed her some My Hero University merch his mom brought. As Himiko rummaged through the bag, something old and worn slipped out, a small vintage diary. Izuku picked it up and smiled at the familiar cover. "Hey, why not make a bucket list?" he said. "Things to do before well, you know." Himiko glanced at him, unimpressed. "Corny." Izuku laughed. "Okay, fine. Then I'll make something else, like boyfriend commandments." "Oh my god, that's even worse," Himiko groaned, but she sat beside him anyway. "Still, if a guy does all of them, he's definitely your man." Izuku tapped his pen on the first page. Commandment 1. Boyfriend should never make me cry." Himiko snatched the pen. "You haven't lived a normal life at all, Zuzu." She shook her head. "That's not realistic. No relationship is perfect. Love hurts. Crying is normal." Izuku sighed and changed it. "Fine. Then 2 new ones." He wrote slower this time. "Boyfriend should always give me a chocolate drink whenever I'm sad." Himiko snorted. "Childish." Izuku pretended not to hear her and wrote another line. "Boyfriend should always hold my hand whenever I cross the street." "That one's cute," Himiko said, finally approved. They were still talking when a sudden voice echoed loudly from the door. "Hey, Deku!" They turned and froze. Katsuki was riding Shoto's wheelchair like it was a race car. Both Izuku and Himiko shouted, "Where is Shoto?" A weak answered from the hallway. Moments later, Shoto appeared crawling on the floor, sweating and traumatized, clearly minutes away from crying. Izuku glared murderously at Katsuki. Katsuki only smirked and spun the wheelchair once, like he was proud of committing a federal crime. Himiko pushed the tray closer to Izuku. "Zuzu, you haven't touched anything since morning." Izuku only hummed in acknowledgement, though he didn't lift a single piece of food. His pen kept moving across the old diary, scratching quietly as he added another line to his boyfriend commandments. Katsuki leaned over his shoulder to peek, but Izuku snapped the diary shut and drew it to his chest. "Hey, what are you writing?" Katsuki demanded. Izuku hugged the notebook protectively. "It's my dream." Shoto, now sitting properly in his reclaimed wheelchair, tilted his head. "What dream?" Izuku hesitated, then smiled softly. "To be a high school teacher." The room fell quiet for a moment. They all knew the truth, even Izuku. His condition made it nearly impossible. Still, he said it with a hopeful look in his eyes, the kind of hope that made the silence feel heavy. Himiko rested her chin on her hand and grinned when they turned to her. "My dream? I'm gonna marry my idol." Izuku laughed, and even Katsuki snorted. You really think that'll happen? Watch me, Himiko said proudly. When it was Shoto's turn, he didn't answer right away. He stared down at the table, fingers playing with the edge of his blanket. My dream, he began quietly, is to find my older brother, Tuya, so our family can finally be whole. No one spoke after that. Katsuki put his chopsticks down. Izuku lowered his sandwich. Himiko's smile faded slowly. Shoto's voice had dropped into something fragile, something that made their hearts twist. They all sat there, suddenly without an appetite. Izuku cleared his throat, trying to lighten the mood. Katsuki, what about you? What's your dream? Katsuki didn't answer immediately. He looked at each of them before letting out a small, tired smile, rare and painfully genuine. To live longer. Izuku felt the words hit like a punch. He lowered his head so none of them could see his expression. His throat tightened, and he blinked rapidly, trying to hide the tears building in his eyes. He didn't want anyone to see how much that dream hurt him. He didn't want Katsuki to know how scared it made him feel. But Katsuki's dream echoing in his head only made Izuku grip his diary tighter, like he needed to hold onto something before his emotions broke loose. Izuku began taking the red capsules, the experimental pills Dr. Chiyo had shown him. He had agreed to be the first patient to try them. After a week, the changes were undeniable. His sleep became normal. He no longer collapsed without warning. He woke up early just like Katsuki. For the first time in his life, Izuku felt like a normal 17-year-old. When Katsuki spotted him walking through the hallway looking refreshed and full of energy, he raised an eyebrow. Oi, what's with you? You look less dead. Izuku laughed and pulled out the red pill bottle to show him, but Katsuki snatched it instantly. It's vitamins, Katsuki said too quickly, hiding the bottle behind his back. Izuku squinted suspiciously. Katsuki, give it back. Before Izuku could grab it, Katsuki reached for something else, the diary sticking out of Izuku's jacket. Boyfriend. Commandments? Katsuki read the title out loud, grinning like he had won the lottery. This is so effing corny, but I might do it. Izuku's entire face heated up. Kei Katsuki, give that back. He grabbed the diary, hugged it against his chest, then acting on pure impulse and slung an arm around Katsuki's shoulders. Katsuki froze for half a second, surprised. Izuku tugged him forward. Come on. Let's go outside. Katsuki clicked his tongue, pretending to act annoyed, but he followed him anyway. As they stepped out into the sunlight, Izuku felt something bloom warm and bright inside him. His body finally obeyed him. His mind felt clear. He wasn't drifting in and out of consciousness anymore. And beside him was Katsuki, alive, breathing, fighting, and no longer someone he had to worry about losing alone. Izuku smiled to himself. Not because he felt normal again, but because he would get to stay by Katsuki's side longer than he ever dared to hope. 2 weeks later, Izuku and Himiko had just returned from the salon with fresh haircuts, while Katsuki and Shoto sported matching ear piercings that made them look like rebellious delinquents rather than patients stuck in the zero ward. For the four of them, this was their version of an adventure, a tiny rebellion that made the hospital feel less like a cage and more like a place where they could still breathe a little. They all hung out in the common room, laughing about how Shoto nearly fainted from the piercing gun even though he couldn't feel pain. One by one, though, sleep pulled them in. First Shoto, then Himiko, then even Katsuki, who had slumped sideways on the couch with his hoodie covering half his face. Izuku was the only one still awake. Aizawa approached from behind, voice flat as always. Midoriya, when was the last time you slept? Izuku stiffened. 2 days ago? I haven't felt sleepy. Not since I started taking that medicine. Aizawa stared at him with tired, piercing eyes. The experimental pills? How long have you been taking them? A month, maybe more, Izuku admitted softly. Aizawa's jaw tightened. Do your parents know about this? Izuku nodded too quickly. Why do they know? They agreed. He kept his voice steady, but his hands shook behind his back. His forged signatures must never be discovered. He couldn't let go of the medicine, not when it made him feel alive. Aizawa didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. Stop taking it. That's an order. His tone left no room for negotiation. Izuku bowed his head and quietly left. As soon as he turned the corner, tears blurred his vision, trickling down even though he forced a smile onto his lips. He didn't know why he was smiling. Maybe it hurt less if he pretended everything was fine. He walked back to his room, wiping his face with trembling hands. But when he opened the door, his heart jumped. His cabinet was empty and someone was rummaging through the bathroom. Izuku rushed forward and found Himiko hunched over the toilet, pouring an entire bottle of red capsules into the swirling water. Tears fell down her cheeks even as she angrily shook the bottle dry. Himiko? Izuku's voice cracked. What are you doing? She spun around, her eyes red and furious. You're stupid. You're so stupid, Izuku. Her voice broke as she grabbed his shoulders. I heard everything. You and Aizawa, the medicine, the lies, are you insane? Izuku's chest tightened. Himiko, stop. That's not medicine, she screamed. That's an experiment, you jerk. Her hands shook as she pointed at him. You're putting someone else before yourself again. You're doing this for something stupid. Izuku swallowed hard, tears streaming uncontrollably. Himiko, please, we're friends. You have to understand. She trembled, breath uneven, and after a shaky moment she asked softly, Tell me, is it because of Katsuki? Izuku froze. Himiko saw the way he hesitated, and her anger surged again. Izuku, do you love Katsuki? I don't know. You don't know? She shouted, voice cracking. You risked your life for that idiot, and you're going to say you don't know? Izuku covered his face, overwhelmed. Himiko, please. Is Katsuki even worth the sacrifice? Her voice was almost a sob. Does Katsuki love you? Why are you wasting your life for a guy you only met last year? Her expression twisted, pain, anger, fear all swallowing her at once. Izuku panicked and covered her mouth, terrified Katsuki might hear from the hallway. Himiko, please, he whispered. Don't say it like that. She slowly pushed his hand away, her whole body trembling. Fine. I'll say this one last time. Her voice dropped to a cold whisper, harsher than anything she had ever said before. If you die because of what you're doing, Izuku, don't expect me at your funeral. I won't waste a single tear on an idiot like you. She stepped past him, slammed the door, and left him standing alone. Izuku sank to the floor, his chest hurting as if someone had ripped it open. Every word Himiko threw at him replayed over and over like a curse he couldn't escape. And for the first time since he began the pills, Izuku felt truly terrified. What if she was right? What if he really was dying for nothing? What if Katsuki never felt the same way? All these thoughts stressed and pressured him, leading to a nosebleed and massive headache that only caused Izuku to faint against the cold floor. The sky outside was shifting from black to faint blue, but Izuku's eyes were still wide open. He hadn't slept a second. Every time he closed his eyes, Himiko's words echoed inside his head like a stab he couldn't pull out. He kept replaying the moment, her anger, her breaking voice, her threat, and every time he thought about it, it hurt in a way no physical pain ever had. He sat on his bed hugging his pillow, trying to breathe through the ache in his chest, when he suddenly heard loud knocking and an even louder voice. Deku, open up. Izuku flinched, then let out a soft, helpless laugh. Even when he felt miserable, Katsuki's voice somehow pushed a smile out of him. He wiped his face with his sleeve and opened the door. Katsuki stood there fully dressed. Jacket zipped up, baseball cap pulled low, hands shoved into his pockets as if he were waiting for him outside his house, not in a hospital hallway. His expression was the usual scowl, but the moment he saw Izuku's face, something in him shifted. You look like sheet, Katsuki said bluntly. Izuku quickly stepped back and rubbed his eyes. I was watching something sad. Demon Vanquisher? Katsuki asked with a smirk. Izuku nodded quickly just to end the topic. Why? Episode 11. Katsuki didn't look convinced, but he let it go. Instead, he jerked his chin upward. You going somewhere? I should be asking you that, Izuku replied. Are you going on a trip? Katsuki clicked his tongue. We are going on a trip. Izuku blinked. W.E. Katsuki didn't give him time to react. He stepped inside Izuku's room like he owned the place, picked up Izuku's slippers from the floor, and shoved them into his hands. Quickly get your jacket, Katsuki ordered. Just wear slippers. And bring a camera or notebook or whatever you use to write your weird stuff. Izuku stared in confusion, mouth hanging open. Katsuki turned and gave him a look as if saying, move or I'll drag you. Without thinking, Izuku hurried to grab his jacket from the chair. Okay, I'm coming. He took his camera, then hesitated. His notebook and diary were still on the table. He grabbed the notebook but left the diary in the drawer, hiding it deep under his shirts. No more accidental peeking for anyone. When he turned around, Katsuki was already standing at the door, arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently. Move it, nerd. Izuku swallowed, shoved his notebook into his pocket, and followed him. Katsuki refused to explain anything during the entire silent walk out of the hospital doors. He only held onto Izuku's wrist, tugging him forward whenever he slowed down. Izuku tried asking where they were going, but Katsuki only grunted or rolled his eyes. Eventually, after several minutes of walking across a road and stepping into rougher ground, Katsuki stopped. Put this on, he said, holding out a folded piece of black cloth. Izuku stared at it. A BLNDFLD? Katsuki, are you kidnapping me? Katsuki clicked his tongue. If I wanted to kidnap you, I'd carry you on my shoulder like a sack of stupid potatoes. That is not comforting, Izuku mumbled, but he still accepted the cloth. Just put it on, nerd. Izuku tied it around his eyes, tightening it until darkness swallowed everything. The world immediately felt different. His ears became sharper, picking up the wind brushing through some bushes. He felt Katsuki grab his wrist again, firmer this time. Are we outside the city? Izuku asked, gripping Katsuki's sleeve so he wouldn't trip. Just keep walking. If you fall, that's on you, Katsuki replied. His voice carried a strange mixture of irritation and excitement. He squeezed Izuku's arm once, almost as if checking whether he was still there. Izuku felt the ground shift again. This time it was softer, grainier. Warm scent. He froze for a moment, curling his toes inside the slippers. A breeze moved past his cheeks. It carried the scent of salt, the sound of waves, and the distant calls of seagulls. Katsuki, are we near the beach? Izuku whispered, his voice full of stunned curiosity. When Katsuki finally stopped walking, he stepped behind Izuku. Izuku could sense him circling him, adjusting the BLNDFLD at the back of his head, and then resting both hands on Izuku's shoulders. You ask too many questions, Katsuki muttered. Izuku felt hands behind his head, untying the BLNDFLD. Just look. The fabric fell away. Izuku blinked rapidly as light flooded his vision. When it cleared, a breathtaking scene awaited him. The horizon glowed orange and pink, and the sun slowly rose above the water. Gentle waves washed onto the pale sand. The entire shoreline shimmered like it had been dusted with gold. The sea stretched endlessly in front of him, the waves glowing orange from the rising sun. The sky was painted in colors he could not describe, and the sunlight reflected on the water like glittering shards. The wind carried the sound of gentle waves rolling onto the shore. Izuku stepped forward without realizing it. His breath hitched. His fingers rose to his mouth. His eyes softened. No amount of sleep deprivation or pain could dull the beauty he saw. Kaken, I've never seen anything this beautiful, he whispered. His voice cracked as he took another step, his slippers sinking into the sand. Katsuki watched him from the side with his hands in his pockets. Yeah, well, don't cry about it. He tried sounding annoyed, but the corners of his mouth lifted. He stepped closer and nudged Izuku's camera toward him. Take your picture or notes, I guess, idiot. Before the sun changes its mind. Izuku bit back a laugh and raised his camera. He took several shots of the horizon, then crouched to get a lower angle. When he stood again, Katsuki pointed the camera at him. Wait, my hair is messy. Izuku complained, frantically patting his curls. You're always messy, Katsuki remarked while adjusting the lens. Besides, you're ugly no matter what angle I take this from. Izuku turned the camera toward Katsuki. Smile. Katsuki frowned immediately. Why the hell should I smile at your ugly face? Izuku scoffed and stuck out his tongue. Katsuki snapped the photo at that exact moment. The perfect. Captured the real you, Katsuki said as he lowered the camera. He looked strangely satisfied, as if teasing Izuku restored his entire soul. Izuku moved to grab the camera from him, but Katsuki grabbed his waist first. Izuku froze immediately. Katsuki pulled him closer, pressing their sides together while resting his chin lightly above Izuku's shoulder. His arm wrapped firmly around Izuku's waist. Hey Katsuki, what are you doing? Izuku stammered. His cheeks heated up, and he wasn't sure whether it was the sunrise or the blonde causing it. Katsuki did not answer immediately. He pressed his forehead gently against the side of Izuku's head. Shut up for a second, Katsuki whispered. His voice dropped into something soft and unguarded. Can we just stay like this? Just for a few more seconds. Don't move. Don't let go. Izuku swallowed hard. He nodded slowly and placed his hand on Katsuki's arm. Both of them faced the rising sun. The waves moved in rhythm with their breaths. Izuku felt the weight and warmth of Katsuki's body, and he felt his own heartbeat trying to escape his chest. A memory flashed in his mind. Boyfriend commandment number 10. Boyfriend should watch the sunrise with me. The realization made his throat tighten. Katsuki exhaled shakily behind him. I feel weird, he muttered. He pressed his forehead lightly against the back of Izuku's head. Weird how? Izuku asked softly. Katsuki hesitated. His hand trembled slightly where it rested on Izuku's stomach. Since then, I've been afraid of so many things. Needles. Waking up. Not waking up. All of it. Izuku turned his head slightly to hear him better. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Katsuki gripped Izuku's waist a little tighter, as if anchoring himself. Now that I've hugged you, I'm not afraid anymore. Izuku, what did you do to me? Izuku opened his mouth, but his words were lost. He felt a flutter in his chest, a warmth stronger than the sun's light. He looked down at Katsuki's hand around him, then turned to fully face him. He raised a hand, cupped Izuku's cheek, and leaned forward. Katsuki? Katsuki leaned forward before Izuku could say anything else. His eyes softened, lips trembling faintly. He placed a gentle kiss on Izuku's forehead. Izuku's entire world stopped. His vision blurred. His ears rang. His legs suddenly felt like water. The warmth from that kiss spread through him but quickly twisted into something terrifying. His body grew numb. His breath caught halfway. Kin, Izuku whispered, but the sound barely escaped his lips. His knees buckled. Katsuki caught him just in time, dropping to the sand with him in his arms. Izuku's camera fell beside them, imprinting itself slightly in the sand. Katsuki's hands trembled violently as he cupped Izuku's cheeks. Izuku? Izuku, look at me. Stay awake. His voice broke as he shook Izuku gently, panic taking over every part of him. Izuku's gaze flickered. His eyes felt heavy, darker than any sleep he had ever fallen into. His breathing slowed. Katsuki's voice became distant, as if he were underwater. Katsuki patted his cheeks repeatedly, tears spilling down his face without restraint. Izuku, don't faint. Don't you dare faint and sleep right now. Open your eyes. Izuku tried. He really tried. But his vision dimmed until only Katsuki's terrified face remained. He noticed something dripping from Katsuki's nose, a small trail of blood down to his lips. Katsuki wiped it away roughly, refusing to let go of Izuku's face. Katsuki, blood. Izuku tried to say. Katsuki wiped his nose, but the bleeding continued. His voice trembled violently. Don't look at that. Look at me instead. Izuku, stay awake. Izuku, please. Stay with me. Moments after, Katsuki began to cough up blood as well, breathing heavily as he tried to keep Izuku awake. Izuku tried to speak. He wanted to reassure him. He wanted to wipe the tears off Katsuki's face. But he no longer had control over his body. "Please," Katsuki cried. His body shook violently. "Please stay with me. Izuku, don't leave me. Not now. Not again. Stay awake. Stay awake, demand it." Izuku wanted to reach out. He wanted to smile. He wanted to hold him and say he would be fine. However, he could no longer move. He could only stare at Katsuki's face for the last few seconds before everything faded into darkness. Izuku used to think it was supposed to be warm, soft, magical. But as he lay there in a haze of darkness, drifting between a dream and a memory he didn't want, a different thought surfaced. Why did I even wish to meet the one? Why did I pray so hard for love? Love only made everything harder. Love made him terrified. Love made him break. He jolted awake. His entire body trembled. Sweat ran down his temples, dampening the pillow beneath his head. His heartbeat pounded violently against his chest, so fast he could hear it echoing inside his ears. His breaths came out shallow and uneven, and the plastic mask over his mouth fogged with each shaky exhale. With quivering fingers, Izuku lifted the mask away. His throat tightened as the cold air stung his skin. The first name that came to his mind slipped out in a hoarse whisper. "Kaken." His eyes darted toward the small sofa beside his bed. Katsuki usually curled up there, pretending he wasn't watching over Izuku whenever he slept. Sometimes he snored. Sometimes he complained. Sometimes he'd mutter, "Wake up, nerd," while pretending not to care. But the sofa was empty. Neat, undisturbed, no jacket lying over the armrest, no pillow tossed aside. No Katsuki. Izuku's chest tightened painfully. He tried not to assume the worst, but the loneliness sitting in his stomach told him otherwise. He pushed the blanket away and sat up, wincing at the sting in his hand. The needle from his fore bent awkwardly as he accidentally tugged it, and in a moment of panic, he ripped it out. Blood trickled down his wrist. He lifted his hand and froze. The back of it was covered in tiny scabs, faded puncture marks, and faint bruises. His fingertips tingled from the numbness. How long was I asleep this time? He swallowed hard, stood up too quickly, and the world spun. He pressed one hand against the wall for balance. When he lifted his other hand to brush his hair away from his face, he felt it, long strands brushing his cheeks. Longer than it should be, longer than the haircut he got with Himiko. His breathing hitched. He grabbed a handful of his hair with trembling fingers. "No way, this can't be right," he whispered. His voice was so small that the room seemed to swallow it. He stumbled to the mirror. His reflection stared back, a thinner face, slightly paler, with hair falling almost to his jawline. He backed away in fear. "How long?" His voice cracked. "How long was I asleep?" He ran. He didn't even bother wiping the blood from his hand. He pushed open his door and sprinted down the hallway. The cold floorboards slapped against his slippers. His heartbeat echoed between the walls. He skidded to a stop at Katsuki's room. The lights were off. The curtains were open. The bed was perfectly made, the sheets flat and crisp, untouched for days. "Kaken?" he whispered as he stepped inside. Silence answered him. He checked the closet, empty. The drawers, empty. The bedside table, empty except for a dust ring where a glass used to be. His heart sank further. His breathing turned shallow again. Did he get discharged? Did he leave? Did I miss it? Did I sleep through it? Did he say goodbye? Did he wait? Did he give up on waiting? Izuku pressed both hands to his eyes, forcing himself not to cry. He backed out of the room, clinging to the doorframe. His legs shook as if they might give out again. He tried searching for Shoto next. Himiko. Anyone. He turned the corner too quickly, nearly slipping in his own blood trail. Someone caught him by the elbow before he fell. A boy, maybe 18 or 19, stood in front of him. His long hair was tied back loosely, revealing multiple ear piercings glinting under the hallway lights. Silver hoops. Black studs. A thin bar at the top of his ear. His expression was sharp but not unkind. "Hey," the boy said, steadying him. "Man, you're bleeding a lot. Are you okay?" You look like you're about to pass out again. Izuku stared at him with wide, frantic eyes. His lips trembled. Where are Katsuki, Himiko, and Shoto? He blurted out. His voice cracked halfway through Katsuki's name. He clutched the stranger's shirt without realizing it. Please, I can't find them. Their rooms are empty. Where are they? The boy frowned in confusion. He glanced down the hallway, then back at Izuku. Wait. He pointed at Izuku's room door behind him. You came out of that room, right? Izuku nodded quickly, wiping his nose with his sleeve. The boy's expression shifted from confusion to something like disbelief. Then he pointed directly at Izuku. Hold on, are you Izuku? Before Izuku could answer the pierced man's question, a loud, shrill, all too familiar voice echoed from the end of the hallway. Izuku! Izuku's heart jumped. He turned around just as Himiko came running, half running, half dragged by a male nurse who was desperately trying to keep a syringe in her arm. Tubes dangled from her elbow, the cotton pad barely holding on as the nurse struggled to take a blood sample. Himiko? Izuku breathed, stunned. The moment Himiko saw him standing there, upright and awake, she completely forgot she was in the middle of a medical procedure. She tore the cotton from her arm, ignored the small trail of blood that followed, and launched herself straight at Izuku. Izuku barely had time to brace himself before she collided with him. Her arms wrapped around his neck so tightly he almost lost his balance. You idiot! You stupid son of a biscuit! She sobbed into his shoulder. I knew it, I knew you'd wake up. I kept telling everyone you'd wake up. Izuku's chest tightened. Their last conversation had been full of anger, slaps of truth, and painful words. Yet now, Himiko clung to him like a sister reunited with a lost sibling. Izuku brought his shaking arms up around her. Himiko. I'm awake. I'm okay. Then the young man with piercings showed up again. Himiko, for God's sake, you're going to kill this guy, he muttered, wiping a dot of her blood from his cheek. Himiko released Izuku just long enough to whirl around and scream at him. Shut up, Tamura. You're lacking moisture. That's why your skin is always dry. Tamura blinked at her, offended yet used to this treatment. I moisturize twice a day, thank you. Izuku's eyes finally traveled down Himiko's outfit. She was in a neatly pressed school uniform, the blazer a deep navy blue, her tie crooked, and her skirt slightly crumpled from running. But what caught his attention were her shoes. On one foot, a leather school shoe, and on the other, a red hospital slipper. Himiko, what are you wearing? Izuku asked, baffled. Himiko sniffed harshly and wiped her tears on her sleeve. I came straight from school, dumbass. They called me the moment you woke up and I ran so fast I forgot to change the other shoe. So shut up about it. Despite her words, she softened, looking Izuku up and down as though memorizing every detail. Her voice trembled with relief. I missed you, she whispered. Don't ever sleep that long again. You scared us. You scared me. Izuku nodded slowly. You talked to my mom already. She said they were stuck in traffic. Himiko gave him a long, searching stare, almost as if deciding whether or not to believe him. She sighed and dropped the subject. Remembering her manners, she yanked Tamura forward by the collar. This dried raisin behind me, she said, pointing at Tamura's face, is Tamura Shigaraki. His older sister is admitted here. Don't mind him, he looks touch-starved but he's a nice guy. Tamura's eye twitched. Please stop describing me like a dehydrated fruit. Izuku bowed politely despite everything. Nice to meet you, Tamura. Himiko wiped her nose. He's been helping me keep track of you while you were asleep. We practically haunted the hallways waiting for you to move. Izuku felt his stomach twist when she said asleep. He hesitated, then turned to the nearest doctor standing in the hall. Excuse me, he asked quietly, how long was I asleep this time? The doctors exchanged looks. None of them answered. One only smiled gently, patting Izuku on the shoulder as if he were a child afraid of the dark. Izuku's heart pounded harder. Trying to steady himself, he forced a small smile. I'm feeling better. Really. The medicine you gave me, it helped. The doctor who had once offered the experimental pills nodded politely but said nothing more. Izuku felt a chill run up his spine. He turned back to Himiko, trying not to sound desperate. "Himiko," he whispered, "where are they?" She blinked. "Who?" "Shoto." Izuku asked, his voice trembling. "Aizawa? Katsuki?" Himiko's expression changed instantly. Her smile vanished like a candle blown out. Her hands fell away from his arms. A nurse led them into a quiet private room, where a small table had been set up for Izuku. Plates upon plates of food covered the surface. Soup, fruits, sandwiches, pudding, even katsudon. It looked like a feast prepared for someone who hadn't eaten in ages. But Izuku didn't touch any of it. He sat across from Himiko, his hands curled tightly in his lap. His hair fell forward, hiding part of his face, but Himiko could still see the anxiety swirling in his eyes. "Himiko," he whispered, "I won't eat anything until you tell me. Please." "Where are they? Katsuki, Shoto, Aizawa, where's everyone?" Himiko tugged at the sleeve of her uniform. She looked away. Her breath trembled. "Aizu, just eat first." Izuku shook his head firmly. "No. You're acting weird. Everyone is acting weird. And all this food," he glanced around the table. "Are you guys preparing a surprise party? Is that it?" Himiko swallowed hard. She forced a small smile. "A party? Really? Are you that stupid?" Izuku frowned. "Then what is it? Why won't anyone tell me? Did they send you here first because the others are waiting somewhere? Are they hiding in another room?" "Izuku." Himiko's voice cracked. "Stop." Izuku looked at her slowly. The tiny hope in his chest flickered like a candle struggling against the wind. Himiko wrung her hands together, her eyes glistening. She tried to breathe normally, but her shoulders kept shaking no matter how hard she fought it. "Izuku," she whispered. "You slept for 8 months." Everything inside Izuku froze. He heard the words, but his mind refused to accept them. Himiko reached across the table, placing her cold hands over his. "We tried waking you up. All of us. Every day. You just kept sleeping." Izuku stared at the food in front of him, but it felt like the plates were miles away. His throat burned. His hands trembled violently. But he forced himself to nod. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll accept that." He picked up his spoon with a shaky hand and slowly ate the bite, even though his taste buds felt numb. He needed something, anything, to keep him grounded as Himiko continued. She spoke softly as though every word might break him. 3 months after you fell asleep, Shoto got a call from his family. His brother Tuya, there were new leads. So Shoto left the hospital to help search. He didn't want to go, but he said he'd come back once he found him. Izuku's eyes lowered. Shoto, another bite of food, another swallow that scraped his throat on the way down. Himiko tucked her hair behind her ear. "Aizawa, last month he had a slide. He's alive, but he can't work anymore. His body's weak. Recovery is slow." Izuku froze mid-chew. The spoon clattered against his plate. His heart lurched in panic. "Sheet," he whispered. Why did it take me so long to fall asleep? Katsuki must have had such a hard time, he must have. "Izuku, will you stop worrying about that JRK?" Himiko slammed her palm on the table so hard the plates rattled. Izuku jolted, startled by her sudden outburst. Tears spilled down Himiko's cheeks as she covered her face with both hands, trying to breathe. She shook her head helplessly. "You always think about him first," she sobbed. "Even now. Even after everything." "Himiko," Izuku leaned forward, reaching for her hand, but she snatched hers away and cried harder. Her voice wavered, cracked, and broke entirely as she finally forced herself to say the worst words possible. "Izuku," she grabbed his hand this time and squeezed it painfully tight. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Izuku's heart pounded so loudly he couldn't hear anything else. Himiko wiped her tears with the back of her hand, then looked him straight in the eyes. Katsuki died." Time stopped. Izuku stared blankly. His pupils shook. His mouth opened but no sound came out. His chest collapsed inward as if someone had stabbed straight through it. "No," he whispered. His voice was barely audible. "Himiko, don't lie. Please don't lie to me. That's not funny." Himiko cried harder. "I'm not lying." Izuku shook his head over and over, gripping his hair. "No. He promised me. He told me he'd be okay when I wake up. He said he'd stay with me. He told me not to leave him." His voice broke completely and he curled forward, hands clutching his chest. The pain hollowed him out. Tears streamed down his shaking cheeks. He cried so loudly it echoed in the room. Every memory of Katsuki flashed in front of him. Every promise. Every touch. Every stubborn smile. Katsuki, who held his hand during his angiograms. Katsuki, who begged him to stay awake. Katsuki, who said he wasn't afraid anymore when Izuku hugged him. Katsuki, who kissed his forehead. Katsuki, whose face he saw just before slipping into darkness. Izuku pressed his forehead against the table and sobbed sideways into his arms. "Kaken, you promised," he choked. "You said you'd be okay?" His cries grew louder, rawer, more broken. And Himiko, crying just as hard, wrapped her arms around him as Izuku's entire world crumbled around him. Himiko grew frustrated as Izuku cried, her hands shaking as she wiped her cheeks. She looked torn between anger and heartbreak, but she forced her expression to harden. Even then, her voice cracked beneath the roughness. Himiko slammed her palm on the table. "Don't waste your tears on that guy, Izuku," she said, her jaw tight as she glared at him. "He's better off dead in our minds." Izuku froze at her wording, the meaning twisting strangely in his chest. She didn't sound like someone mourning a dead friend. She sounded like someone avoiding the truth. He lifted his head slowly, trying to understand. His voice wavered with fear and hope all at once. What do you mean?" Himiko let out an irritated sigh and pushed her hair back. "He's alive," she said sharply, as if the words slipped out by accident. "There? Happy now?" Izuku covered his face as tears fell again, his shoulders trembling with relief. The idea that Katsuki still existed somewhere steadied his breathing. Even if everything else shattered, that one truth was enough to keep him from collapsing. Himiko softened when she saw his reaction, but only a little. She looked away as if she hated being the one to deliver the truth. Still, she forced herself to continue. Himiko crossed her arms, her gaze dropping. "I didn't want you to hear it from him," she said quietly, her voice steadier now. "It would have hurt 100 times worse." Izuku wiped his eyes and waited. His heart still raced, but his body leaned forward, needing to hear the rest. Himiko took a breath before continuing. She tapped her finger anxiously on the table. "A month after you fell asleep, Katsuki recovered," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Completely recovered." Izuku blinked, trying to picture it. Katsuki walking freely, breathing without pain. That thought alone almost made him smile. It felt surreal. Himiko held the edge of the table tightly as if steadying herself. "But after that, he changed," she said, her tone dropping lower. "He didn't look back at any of us." Izuku frowned in confusion and disbelief. Something about this didn't feel right, but he couldn't form the words to interrupt. Himiko continued before he could try. She clenched her teeth in frustration. "He found a way out of that hellhole," she said, shaking her head. "And he never visited Aizawa or Shoto or me ever again." Izuku stared down at his hands, trying to absorb the weight of it. The idea of Katsuki walking away without a goodbye stung deeply. Yet another part of him whispered that maybe it wasn't that simple. Himiko pointed at him as if emphasizing her next words. "He has a new life now," she said, exhaling tiredly. "And it doesn't include us." Izuku nodded slowly as her words settled, though they pierced him like needles. Even then, a soft smile formed on his lips. Knowing Katsuki was alive mattered more than anything else. He let out a shaky breath and looked at the food in front of him. His appetite hadn't returned, but his heart felt strangely lighter. The fear of Katsuki dying had been clawing at him for months. Himiko sniffed and wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Fine then," she said with a forced pout. Maybe I'll make you fall for Tamura instead. At least he isn't weak. Izuku chuckled weakly despite the heaviness in his chest. He shook his head as if the idea was ridiculous. Himiko scowled but didn't argue. He leaned back in his seat and let the silence settle between them. The truth was painful, but it didn't destroy him the way Himiko feared it would. If anything, it reminded him of something simple and steady inside him. Izuku lowered his gaze, his fingers curling slightly on the table. Katsuki is still Katsuki, he murmured quietly, as if reminding himself. He'll always be Katsuki. And even with everything that had changed, 8 months lost, friends gone, life rearranged, Izuku held on to that belief with a calm, unwavering certainty. Tamura stood quietly in the hallway, staring at a framed photograph hanging on the wall. It was a picture of Izuku during one of the hospital's charity events, smiling brightly as if he had never experienced pain at all. Tamura tilted his head, studying the image with a strange mix of curiosity and admiration. Himiko appeared behind him and poked his back with a finger. Izuku's handsome, right? She said with a teasing smirk. If you like him, it's normal. Tamura nearly dropped the picture frame and turned red. I was just looking, he said, lifting his hands defensively. He looks good in it. Himiko narrowed her eyes and stepped closer, her voice low and threatening. If you hurt him, Tamura, I swear I'll hurt you. Tamura gulped and looked away. He knew better than to argue with Himiko when her voice took that tone. She meant every word, even if she was wearing slippers with a school uniform. As Himiko scanned the wall for more photos, her expression shifted. Her eyes landed on a picture of her, Shoto, Izuku, and Katsuki sitting in the hospital gardens smiling despite everything they were going through. Her fingers hovered over Katsuki's face for a long moment. Tamura pointed at the picture. Hey, is that the Katsuki Izuku mentioned earlier? Himiko stiffened immediately. Don't say his name, she said sharply, turning her head toward him. And don't ever let Izuku hear it. Tamura blinked, taken aback. Why not? Himiko didn't answer the question directly. Instead, she reached up and carefully removed the picture from the wall. She checked both ends of the hallway to make sure no one was watching. Then she folded the photograph, creasing it exactly along the line where Katsuki stood, and slipped it into her pocket. She moved to the next row of photos, scanning for any image with Katsuki in it. Tamura watched as she removed each one, her jaw set, her movements quick and decisive. She didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Tamura followed after her with uncertain steps. What happened to him? Himiko shrugged without looking back. Let's just say he died, she said with a careless flick of her hand. Tamura stopped walking. He died. Himiko leaned toward him and whispered with an annoyed sigh. Unfortunately. Tamura didn't understand the layers beneath her tone, but he understood enough to know this wasn't something he should press further. Himiko's anger toward Katsuki wasn't simple. It was the kind that came from heartbreak. A few steps later, Himiko suddenly slowed down. She stood outside Izuku's room, and Tamura stopped beside her. Through the open door, they saw Izuku hugging his mother, laughing at something his uncle said, surrounded by packed bags and gifts. The room felt warm, peaceful for the first time in months. Izuku's smile shimmered like sunlight, bright and genuine. But Himiko's expression didn't soften. Instead, her eyes darkened as she watched him. She leaned toward Tamura again, speaking so quietly only he could hear. Izuku's a liar, she whispered, her gaze fixed on Izuku's smile. But instead of using words, he flashes his smile. Tamura frowned slightly, listening closely. Himiko crossed her arms and continued. Don't be fooled by it. Inside, the pain is already killing him. Tamura looked back into the room, noticing the way Izuku's hand trembled when he laughed. Something about it felt tough. Himiko wiped her eyes quickly before the tears could form. Izuku's had enough pain already, she said in a trembling voice. That's why he shouldn't see or talk to Katsuki anymore. Tamura stayed silent, unsure how to respond. Himiko's grip tightened around the pictures in her pocket. Her decision wasn't out of hate, not really. It was out of fear that Katsuki's return would shatter Izuku all over again. And to her, Protecting Izuku meant keeping him far from anything that could break him again. Even Katsuki. At 9:46 p.m., Izuku was laughing with his mother over bowls of katsudon. The warmth of the restaurant made him feel safe, and he prayed quietly that he wouldn't fall asleep again. He wanted to memorize everything: her smile, her voice, the feeling of being alive. But deep inside, there was an empty space he could not ignore. Katsuki. Even with Himiko's harsh words ringing in his ears, Izuku still believed he would come back. He wanted to hold on to that hope, even if it hurt. He joked with his mother between mouthfuls of katsudon, both of them teasing each other the way they used to. For a moment, it felt like life had returned to normal. But when Izuku glanced toward the entrance, his hand froze in midair. Katsuki was standing in the doorway. He looked around the shop as if searching for someone. He was wearing a school uniform and carrying a backpack over one shoulder. His beanie was gone, revealing short blonde hair and new piercings that caught the light. Even though he had changed, Izuku recognized those eyes instantly. Their gazes met. Izuku's breath caught. His heart pounded painfully against his ribs. He blinked. Katsuki was gone. Izuku shot up from his seat and ran outside. He looked left, then right, then across the street, but the sidewalk was empty. The night felt too quiet, almost mocking him. He tried to convince himself it wasn't really Katsuki. If it were, he would have approached him, right? Or maybe it was just his mind, desperate to see him again. By the time he returned home, it was almost dawn. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep even for a minute. Fear gripped his chest, the fear of losing time again, of waking up months later, of losing more people. But most of all, he thought of the man in the doorway. If Katsuki really saw him, why didn't he come closer? Did he think Izuku hated him after everything? Or was Himiko right? Had Katsuki changed so much he didn't want to return? Unable to endure the thoughts, Izuku got up, slipped on his jacket, and walked into the cold hallway. The rooftop had always comforted him. He wanted to feel the same wind he used to share with Katsuki, even if it hurt. The moment he stepped onto the rooftop, he froze. Someone was standing near the edge, back turned, wearing a beanie. Izuku's heart leapt out of his chest. Katsuki, you really are a bastard. WH. The figure turned around. It wasn't Katsuki. It was Tamura. Izuku's smile collapsed immediately, and he quickly bowed his head. Sorry, he said quietly, rubbing his eyes as he sat down again. Tamura walked over and lowered himself beside him. Do you really miss him? He asked softly, tugging on his own beanie as Izuku glared at it. Izuku wiped his face and forced a laugh. Why are you wearing that anyway? I almost had a heart attack. Tamura tilted his head. His name is Katsuki Bakugo, right? Izuku nodded. Yes, why? Izuku sat stiffly on the chair while Himiko brushed foundation on his face. The makeup sponge felt cold, and he kept scrunching his nose, making her glare at him. He didn't like makeup, never had, and right now he felt like he was being prepared for execution rather than a party. Izuku, stop moving or I'll stab your eye with this eyeliner, Himiko said, tapping his chin to make him look up. She looked unusually serious tonight, her hair tied back as if she were preparing for battle. Izuku grumbled under his breath, tugging at the collar of the shirt she'd forced on him earlier. I hate this. I feel like a clown. Himiko leaned back and crossed her arms. You look fine. Better than fine, actually. She grabbed a lip balm and pushed it against his mouth. And before you complain, no, I'm not going. I'm still on probation. Izuku blinked. Probation? Himiko clicked her tongue. Alcohol restrictions. Bipolar disorder. Doctor's orders. I go near booze and they'll lock me in a padded room again. She shrugged as if it were nothing, but her eyes softened. Listen. Socialize a bit. Be normal. Or at least try not to be a freak for one night. Izuku sighed and stared at his reflection. He looked fine, maybe even attractive, but his chest felt tight. He understood what Himiko meant. At this party, nobody knew him. He could pretend he wasn't a sick kid who slept for months at a time. But deep down, he only wanted one thing. He wanted to see Katsuki. The door swung open. If Himiko's not coming, then I guess I'll date you tonight, Tamura joked, placing a hand dramatically on his chest. Izuku wrinkled his nose. Please don't. Before he could stand, another voice spoke from behind Tamura, a calm, familiar, almost teasing voice. How about me? Izuku's breath caught. Shoto. Shoto stepped inside, wearing a new jacket and the same flat expression as always, but Izuku didn't care. He jumped up, nearly knocking over the table, and hugged him tightly. Shoto actually laughed, soft and awkward, as he hugged him back. Himiko pointed at Shoto with narrowed eyes. Weirdo. Shoto shot back without hesitation. Crazy. And just like that, they were chasing each other around the room again. Himiko swinging a brush like a weapon and Shoto rolling his eyes as he dodged her. Izuku felt warmth bloom in his chest. It was comforting to see something that hadn't changed. Tamura slipped an arm around Izuku's shoulders. All right, pretty boy, let's go. Izuku groaned, tugging at his shirt again. Do I seriously have to go to this party you're throwing? Tamura snorted. If I suffered through planning it, you're suffering through attending it. Izuku allowed himself to be dragged toward the door, though his stomach churned with nerves. As he stepped out of the room and heard the distant music pulsing down the hall, he clasped his hands together for a moment. Izuku clung tightly to Tamura's jacket as the motorcycle finally slowed to a stop. His legs felt weak from the ride, and he let out a shaky breath as he stepped off. The relief was immediate, but so was the fear that he might have fallen asleep mid-ride. Tamura removed his helmet and smirked. You looked cute being scared back there. He flicked Izuku's forehead lightly as if to reassure him. Izuku rubbed the spot and frowned. Tamura didn't seem bothered at all, standing tall and stretching his arms casually. I've been with much more dangerous people, Tamura added, tilting his head with a grin. Izuku didn't know whether that was comforting or terrifying. He eyed the massive house in front of them, glowing with colorful lights and shaking from the bass of the music inside. Teenagers were spilling out onto the lawn, laughing and shouting as if the world were theirs. Tamura nudged him forward. Come on. You need one night of normal teenage life. Forget your problems for a bit. Izuku hesitated at the doorway, overwhelmed by the noise even from outside. But Tamura simply grabbed his wrist and pulled him in, and the world exploded into chaos, dancing bodies, flashing lights, laughter, and the unmistakable smell of alcohol. He couldn't help but stare. There were people flirting in the corner, a group taking photos on a messy couch, someone singing terribly into a karaoke mic. Everything was loud, messy, and alive. A man and a woman approached them with big smiles, waving like they'd known Izuku for years. This is Jin Babaigawara, Tamura said, patting the man's shoulder, and this menace beside him is Kenji Hikishi. Kenji slapped Tamura's hand away. We prefer the term, graduates, thank you very much. Her eyes were bright and mischievous, but she seemed genuinely thrilled to meet someone new. Tamura shrugged. Jin's graduation is kind of a coincidence. Jin rolled his eyes dramatically. Hey, it took me 5 years. He leaned closer and gave Izuku a teasing smirk. So this is the one you're courting, Tomu? Tamura coughed loudly. I didn't say that. Kenji flicked Tamura on the back of the head. Oh please. Everyone can tell. Jin opened his mouth again, starting with, it's good you found someone to replace Chi. But Kenji grabbed Jin's arm so fast Izuku barely saw her move. Nope. We are not starting that conversation tonight. Tamura shot her a glare, and Jin immediately shut his mouth, looking guilty. Izuku had no idea who Chi was, but the sudden tension made him feel out of place. Kenji looped an arm around Izuku's shoulders. Come on, sweetheart, let's get you a drink before Tamura stresses you out. She guided him toward the kitchen with a confident sway, pushing past dancing bodies. Izuku glanced back at the others and smiled awkwardly. Your friends, they're really kind. Kenji snorted as she opened the fridge and handed him a soda. Kind? Don't flatter them too much, they'll melt. But the warmth in her voice told Izuku that she meant it. And for the first time since entering the party, he felt a little less alone. Kenji leaned her elbows on the counter while Izuku held the cold bottle she gave him. The kitchen lights were softer than the chaos outside, almost warm, and it made it a little easier for Izuku to breathe. But when he lifted the bottle to read the label, his whole face twisted. Izuku held it away from him. This is alcohol. Kenji blinked, then burst into laughter so loud she had to hold her stomach. Oh please, drink it. It's iced tea. She tapped the bottle with her nail, smirking. Izuku stared, confused. Kenji uncapped her own bottle and took a huge sip. I hate beer. I just put my iced tea in beer bottles so people think I'm normal. Izuku relaxed a bit and smiled awkwardly. He played with the bottle in his hands before asking quietly, earlier, when Jean almost said a name, who's Chisaki? Kenji froze for a moment, just a second, but enough for Izuku to notice. She hid the reaction with another sip. Ancient history. And not your business for tonight. Her tone wasn't rude, just firm, like she was protecting something fragile. Before Izuku could ask more, the kitchen door swung open. Jean stumbled in first, laughing loudly with a cup in hand. Tamura followed, smug as usual, and behind them were two men Izuku had never seen before. One of the newcomers leaned against the counter and winked at Izuku. Izuku looked away immediately, annoyed. The other man stepped forward and Izuku froze. Everything inside him stopped. His fingers loosened around the bottle. His throat tightened, and he felt his heartbeat in his ears. The world blurred as if he were dreaming. Because he knew those eyes. Izuku whispered, breath caught in his chest, Katsuki. Katsuki's head snapped up at the sound of his name. He looked just as shocked, eyes wide, breath halting, body stiffening as if he'd been punched in the stomach. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Not moving. Not breathing. Not speaking. And Izuku could feel it, Katsuki wasn't happy to see him. Not even a little. Jean glanced between them. Wait, do you two know each other? Kenji folded her arms. Izuku, you know him? Tamura only grinned, leaning casually against the fridge like he was watching a show he'd been waiting for. But Katsuki didn't hesitate. Katsuki shoved his hands in his pockets. We were just in the same class in elementary school. No warmth. No excitement. Just a cold, distant explanation. Izuku felt something inside him sink. Katsuki turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. Then he forced a small, awkward smile, polite, unfamiliar, nothing like the boy Izuku knew. Katsuki lifted his gaze just long enough to say, long time no see. His voice was soft, almost rehearsed. Izuku swallowed the pain building in his chest. He forced himself to nod and smile even when it hurt. Long time no see. It tasted like a lie. And it felt like his heart had cracked open, right there in the middle of someone else's kitchen.